Okay, good morning, everybody. Conscious it's 10 o'clock. Just welcome everyone to this public workshop, confirming the recording is happening and we're being live streamed. Is that just recording? Perfect, okay. So welcome councillors, welcome staff to this session. We've got 3 hours, a lot of ground to get through. This is the first workshop, obviously quite a series that's going to help us build our next long-term plan. There will be a ton of questions, there'll be a ton of thoughts and observations from around the table. It'd probably be really good to just get a bit of a heads up from staff as to how you would prefer, whether you just want to present and then open up for discussion, or whether you want particular questions on topics as you deal with it. I'm just mindful of the fact that we can spend as much time as you have available to ask questions, and you won't get through all the information. So
yeah, so if we perhaps as we go through, if there are points of clarification, let's hear those.
Yep.
If we can respond to something or clarify something, and try and maybe make note of the particular things that you then want to have a more sort of a further discussion on. We've made room, we should have ample room if we do deal with it that way to then cover off all those points, and perhaps just go around the table at the very end and make sure that we've heard anything else that that anyone wants to tip in the mix. Because if we respectfully, if we go with all this material, if we do go into a discussion about a matter 10-15 minutes, we simply won't get through it. So we can try and get through it and then hopefully have ample time at the end. That's
appreciated. And I think just sort of, I know there'll be an expectation, from when we talk about long-term plans or annual plans and bits and pieces, that's sort of, how do we build in that discussion about the very high-level strategic vision that we want? The real key foundations that sort of the councillors wish to see built into long-term plan. There's a lot of very structural building blocks, a lot of detail, a lot of plans, a lot of policies. And from a personal point of view, I sort of struggle to see where we get that opportunity to, I guess, set that high-level direction. I'll let you think about that. I don't expect an answer right now. But it's something that we've sort of indicated would be a really good discussion to have.
Can I just, in the second half, the bit that I'll be talking to, it is actually designed for you to have input as we go through each of those parts, which is a bit different to the front end, which is more we need to kind of, Ian needs to go through all of that before maybe fielding questions. But the second half is more a discussion as opposed to a presentation.
And it is designed to be a framework to get to where you want to get to based on what you've just said. So that's where you can, we want to hear your views on what Penny has put together so that we can then hone into that a bit more. But it should give you a reasonable framework just as a starting point.
Cool. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. So hi everyone. For those of you that are new to the table, welcome to your first LTP steering group meeting.
It's very exciting.
It's also my first LTP steering group meeting, so I'll take credit for all of the good bits and deny any awareness of anything else. But we are going to go through 2 chunks today. One is just broadly what we've called the LTP project plan, which, as you can see, is trying to step you through the 10 steering group workshops that have been scheduled up. Obviously, there's flexibility to amend and shape and change that and add workshops, etc., as we need to. But I guess, as Megan was sort of mentioning, it might pay for me to step through the sequence, because I'll try to tie the thread together. So you'll see, it may not be so apparent just from the words on the page, but as we go on that journey, at the beginning is a lot more of that strategic setting, and then it starts to turn into more detail as we go through the sequence. So we might answer some of the questions as we go through that, and then Penny's going to lead the future thinking, strategic framing, some of those big strategic questions that provide some overarching guidance and framework for the LTP, specifically also touching in on the CapEx prioritisation options, and also just taking you through the LTP initial engagement feedback, which was as at 2 days before it closed, but I think we've pretty much got most of it. Cool. So I did think I would quickly start off low, just for those of you that were here and experienced the last LTP, there was a lessons learned exercise that was done at the end of that, both internally with officers and also with elected members. And I thought I would just quickly touch on those key lessons learned that came from councillors, because I'm confident that we've at least addressed them, or we have a plan to address them through the process. So the first one was really around conducting engagement earlier with the community to better inform the LTP. So that's what we're going to go through the first results of today, and I sent out to everybody all of the detailed material on Friday. Commencing this whole process earlier, we are literally 3 months earlier than we were last time. I think the last time the first steering group meeting was in May, and then not again until August. So yeah, we're 3 months ahead, and a lot more of it front loaded. Major LTP policies and strategies presented at the beginning of their work stream, and the planned approach. So you'll see that hopefully through the plan. We're bringing each of those key policies to the table early to explain the approach, and then you'll see them coming back to the steering groups as the work evolves. Focusing on the strategic framework and prioritisation at the outset, that's what Penny's going to talk us through today. Focusing on OPEX through the steering group process, so very tangibly we have OPEX in here alongside CapEx. Early engagement with the Wanaka and Upper Clutha Community Board, so that has been occurring at the back end of last year. And continuing to use the Q&A, which was apparently well received. So yes, absolutely we'll be doing that. So just a little bit of that feedback. So if I go through the approach, and that's it on a page, but I will step through. I'm not proposing to go through every single word on every page, but I'll use the actual slides for each steering group meeting just to frame up. So what we've tried to do here is set out for each steering group what's the topic, what is it that we're looking to cover, and then particularly like what are we really looking for. And you're going to see a lot of that. It's going to say councillor guidance on a particular matter, with a little bit more, in some spaces, a little bit more of kind of briefing. So today, as we said, we're going to cover the project plan. Penny's going to be covering off the future thinking and strategic framing, CapEx prioritisation approach, and that LTP initial engagement, and obviously looking for guidance in that on the plan, on the strategic issues, strategic framing, and in particular on the CapEx prioritisation. You'll see in the next workshop we've got it positioned to come back to you reflecting the feedback from today, so we can look to finalise that.
I think I'd also say if this feels a bit locked in, it's not. It is a work stream that we've tested with John. But if there are clear gaps or something that looks like you need to spend more time on it, or anything else, we're just trying to facilitate getting to the end point with an LTP. So don't feel like we're kind of running the ship here, but we've done what we're here to do, which is to do the donkey work to bring together a structure for you.
Yeah.
I noticed that we've got an election in the middle of all of this, and who knows what's going to change along the way. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Great job. Well done.
There, because I suppose the one thing, we're on a path that, and we start with a whole bunch of assumptions around where we're headed, but there's a couple of real step change assumptions that we need to get on top of early. And I just wanted to signal that because, I mean, you signal some of them that, you know, the impact of the water reform, the stuff like that. But, you know, we've signalled over a number of years that we want to really shift the balance on development contributions. I understand there's a piece going on outside that, but that doesn't change the fact we need to deal to that and actually deal to that assumption early on, because that affects everything behind it. If we don't fundamentally change the balance of growth paying for growth in this LTP, then we've lost the battle. If we don't fundamentally change the balance around visitor economy, revenue, and stuff like that, we've lost the battle.
Yeah.
You know, those things actually, I think, need to be front and centre, and we need to like nail them. I mean, I accept that there's some uncertainties with the development levy stuff, but there's a whole bunch of, we need to model what we want to achieve, and that the new levy structure might allow us to do that. And if we don't do that early, I just fear that we're going to lose the battle on those things.
Yeah, the same with differential rating, all of that. I think we need to.
Yeah, well, rating model. We might actually want to flip the rating model this time. You know, I think we need to. Yeah, you know, we might actually, and I think we need to be ambitious about that, because the things we do know is that it's unaffordable, that growth's not paying for growth, that the visitor, you know, they're the problems we want to solve, and I'd love to sort of tackle those things front end, you know.
So we've scheduled those topics all for the 3rd for April. So maybe if I'll be there in literally 2 minutes. Well, it depends. But yeah, what we've wanted to do is not just look at those as policy review, as if it's a mechanical policy review exercise, but actually the purpose of that session is to say, okay, what are those big macro directional kind of guidance that we need to take?
And is there an opportunity to use the Smart Growth Committee's meeting before that?
Yeah.
Just start that conversation ahead of here.
I think it's worth noting when you're talking about development levies and development contributions and growth paying for growth, that a significant part of that in our current LTP is for water. And so actually that won't be in this LTP. That will be dealt with as part of the water services strategy under the development contribution, development levies policy that is set by the water services CCO. But they are highly motivated to ensure that growth pays for growth. In fact, they're regulated on that. So that is something that we will talk about as we get to that point in the process. But there is the biggest component of that is water, which is a separate conversation, but parallel to this.
Yeah, and I probably should have said at the start, whilst this is very LTP focused, it's throughout this whole journey, wherever there are reform developments, whether that be legislation that's become passed or, you know, whatever direction that we're receiving, we'll be bringing that into the LTP journeys to say, okay, what's that meaning, and is it changing anything on our approach? And similarly, as the water services strategy evolves, we'll bring the water services strategy into these forums as a you know, kind of parallel process to make sure that those interfaces and those connection points are clear.
I take the point about free waters, but I don't think we can ever really wipe our hands of that and say that's not within our scope, because the development levy thing, for instance, how we frame our policy will determine how much growth pays for growth, even through the water services CCO. So
the water services CCO has its own policy, so there'll be 2 policies. We have options on how to manage that through the transition period, but that's something that will be discussed as part of those
just the
reform
point is
discussions.
we set the expectations to them as to how much loading we want to put on growth and
absolutely.
I think that
and they are regulated on it, so they will be they will have an additional pressure on them to make sure that growth pays for growth.
So I think we're not saying that we're devolving. We will be bringing that conversation and have a focus on it.
Okay. And I think just that infrastructure strategy, I think we had the option of including 3 waters within that. I'm thinking about the airport CCO and how we include statements on that in the long-term plan. I do think it's important that we do include 3 waters. I don't know if the intention is so that our SOE can be guided by a document that's had public impact.
Same disclosure.
So that we don't argue year upon year about what goes in that SOE. It's guided by the infrastructure strategy.
Yeah, we can talk about that when we get to the infrastructure strategy. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, and look, there we go, the infrastructure. So yes, so next month's steering group, 2 real components to that. One is the planned approach and the big items as part of the infrastructure strategy. So I know that certainly the intention in all of this is that the infrastructure strategy leads the LTP, doesn't come behind the LTP. Next month, very much around what's the approach for the infrastructure strategy, what are those big ticket items, what's the work plan look like for that, so it's clear when those interaction points will come back to the steering group, but also where the interaction points are with the infrastructure and asset committee. And then the second big component for next month's steering group is really all around financial appetite and financial strategy. So as a document, it links to the financial strategy as part of the LTP. But I guess the bigger part of that strategic conversation is the appetite of the council around rating, debt levels, etc. And Catherine may want to talk a little bit more about that.
Covered that well. Yeah, just getting an early understanding, because if you, for example, said you don't want rates to be higher than 2%, then that's quite a different LTP to letting it all flow up. Yeah. So it just gives us those boundaries.
Yeah, it's actually a good one to start thinking about now for that session.
Yeah. So these topics are, whilst they look very detailed around the strategy item, for example, it actually really is that big picture framing that we're wanting to get that guidance on as part of these workshop discussions. And then the third key component for the steering group 2 is coming back to you with some refinement around the CapEx prioritisation approach. So we'll talk about that today, get your feedback and guidance, and we'll take that away and come back next time. And then the other component for next month is a little bit of a different angle, but is wanting to go through some of the work and some of the framework and approach around community funding and community investment. So there's the team have been working on a community funding policy, which is very much, it's an internal policy, but it's around guidelines and process and framework that we want to bring for day-loading with yourselves, making sure that the grant processes are understood, get your feedback on those, and really starting to take some of that strategic direction around the whole community funding, community investment space. Again, as a way of framing up the way we approach the rest of the LTP. The community facility and funding policy will come to the next workshop, but this is a very much a framing topic.
How much?
Oh, sorry, I assume this is a new thing we've never really done as council before. Just good to see, because there's a lot of philanthropy out there that wants to help.
Yeah.
I'm just mindful, of course, there's fish hooks with some of those. And we shouldn't also take our eye off the ball of council rates also have to fund social infrastructure.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we dump it. So good to see this though.
So how much of those conversations you're having now being informed by the current government's agenda?
We've factored that in, so this is,
To narrow that. Thank you.
The only other thing I would say is all these policies and strategies are actually mandated, so it says in the Local Government Act that it's required, except for this one. So this is our own flavour, but yeah, that's why we are going through this process of reviewing them all, because they are mandated. We can get audited.
We we have heard consistently that you want to have a better ability to have oversight of this area. And this draft policy is phenomenal in terms of its discovery and maturity. And we're really looking forward to you having eyes on that, because you can't make decisions without, being fully informed, I guess, and this will ensure that you are fully informed. And then if there are levers you want to pull, you will understand entirely the impact of those levers. So looking forward to, it's actually Ken's space and Marie Day's piece of work. It's very, very good.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, I think to your question, it hasn't been narrowed based on the current government's approach in terms of taking wellbeings out of the local government act.
I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah. So I think it just, you might have thought that we said, yes, it has been narrowed. No, it hasn't been.
Okay.
This is actually about how you do funding
We need to have that
for what the
conversation.
community wants, and then you can make the decisions.
So they're your decisions,
Yeah, thank you.
I would just add in response to your comment that this is an extension of the work that we have been doing in the past, so the annual grants process, adding more sophistication to that as opposed to partnering with new philanthropic investments and things that are out there in the community. That may come into it, but that's it. This is not fundamentally a new space.
Right,
It's building on the work we've done in the past.
good to know.
And then as we go into steering group 3 in April, so whilst this is full of a lot of policies, actually this is very much, we're looking at this, if we lift it up a few layers, this is really all about your revenue levers. So, with revenue or funding levers. So within that, the whole piece of development contributions and development levies, growth pays for growth, as we say. So setting out what are those big strategic questions within that component, and then being clear on what the path or journey is for the development of an updated development contributions policy. And if I'm right, maybe not looking at Penny, we will also need a development levies policy, maybe.
We're just working through legal advice on that. Looks like we have to have both, because development levies, well, possibly, it depends on when we implement development levies.
Yeah. Fees and charges. So fees and charges are all driven out of the revenue and financing policy. So again, what are the big questions, with the big macro questions within the revenue and financing policy and its implications for fees and charges? And I know as part of the annual plan process that we've just been working through, obviously we spent quite a bit of time talking about things like differential pricing, etc. And we took some actions to bring some of that work back into this process as well. And then rating, so rating models, rating approaches, rating as a source of funding for the RTOs, all part of that rating question. And then the last piece of this puzzle is the community facility and funding policy, which I think is well overdue for review. And actually, if you look at it now with community fees and charges having fundamentally been stripped out of that policy, the residual of the policy is really around commercial and community leases and licence fees. So we'll work through the work program and take some guidance on that space, and then that will need to interface back into the community committee. Anything else you wanted to say on that?
And then just the treasury policy.
Don't forget that.
Yeah.
Don't forget that.
So how do we manage our investments? How do we manage our borrowings? It's
Just a quick note on all of this. The assurance and all the risk and assurance committee, just interested in where that fits into this. Just had some chats, and it's become it's very clear that we need to throw that risk lens across all of this right from the get-go. Same with the water CCO. So just thinking about how we pull some of this stuff back to committees at the right time, whether it's earlier or later. But
When's the first meeting?
9th of April.
Might be
Right? Yeah.
At some point.
Yeah, and then there's another one 30th of June. So there are touch points around, I think, significant assumptions, the treasury policy, capital program risks, And the same thing will apply to the other committees, if they have touch points.
Yeah, I think as we bring each of these policy review processes, so particularly this 14th of April steering group, I think we need to address that interfaces with each of the committees and the approach.
It might be more finance committee actually, that one.
So then if we, my mouse button. Oh. So then if we come into May, so we've spent the time in April looking at the revenue rating, fees and charges, development levies, development contributions space. As we start to go into May and June, this is very much around what's money being spent on. So the first point is to come back to you with a first draft of the infrastructure strategy. So what's that strategy starting to look like? What's changed from the current strategy? Obviously water won't, so I'll correct myself, that may well be in there. You know, that first lens of the CapEx in an unprioritised, untimed lens, what does that CapEx requirements, demands look like from an infrastructure strategy perspective? And also bringing you the first cut of the significant forecasting assumptions. So in particular, what's the LTP development being underpinned by in terms of growth assumptions, cost inflation assumptions from Will, and assumed NZTA funding arrangements, amongst a few others.
I think the key thing to note from an infrastructure strategy perspective and a growth perspective is that this will be somewhat fluid depending on what happens in the sessions before. And the infrastructure strategy, what we see this time is bringing it to you iteratively, whether it's, and when this says present a first draft, that doesn't mean it's going to be a draft of what it looks like at the end. It means it'll be the next stage in, you know, developing an infrastructure strategy and where are the decisions that need to be made. So the actual infrastructure strategy end state is somewhat driven by what we commit to in the LTP, because the infrastructure strategy, which we'll get to in a second, sets out a most likely scenario. It presents options in a range of areas, and then it presents our most likely scenario. Our most likely scenario is heavily driven by what we can invest in the first 10 years, because that drives what can't be done in the first 10 years and what has to be done in the next 20. And so what has happened, I was only here for the last one, but certainly what happened was we focused really heavily on the 10 years and then kind of worked through the rest of it. Rather than what we're trying to do this time is to present to you earlier what the 30-year vision should be when you go into the 10-year prioritisation discussion. So when you see infrastructure strategy on these agendas, you'll be getting iteratively, information iteratively building up. The full infrastructure strategy draft won't come till much later in the year.
Yeah.
But we'll decide on the core basis for that infrastructure strategy early. Significant assumptions in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess my question about that, we had a sort of early feedback from the Climate Reference Group,
yep,
which suggests a very specific lens that we apply to all of our decision making,
yes,
in this process, and obviously how we spend and what we spend on infrastructure, they're suggesting a very specific approach to that. So
yes,
it'd be interesting to understand at what point councillors either decide that's an appropriate, because that's quite a foundational thing, isn't it?
yep. So that's the next session. The next one of these is doing exactly that. So it's a focus on what is the what are the building blocks of the infrastructure strategy and how does it link to the LTP process. In terms of the CRG specific feedback, we have already been discussing that with them, and the infrastructure strategy already builds in a less sophisticated way climate scenarios, and highlights the one that we have invested in basically through the LTP. So we'll just, so we'll be working with the CRG to mature that approach, but that we'll talk about that in more detail at the next steering group meeting.
So continuing on in May, we'll be bringing to you our activity plans, and I'll let me talk you through this because this is probably quite a new approach within this overall LTP and steering group process. So LTP has activity plans. You'll see them in the current LTP. But what we're planning to do here is to bring to you early each of those activity plans. So I think there's 21 proposed activity plans. And so for that, we'll have that opportunity to take you through what that plan is, what it is that we deliver within that activity area and why we do it. So what's its linkage to strategies and plans, for example. What are our levels of service and the associated KPIs? And obviously they're a real opportunity to be having that discussion about levels of service, how we deliver it. At this point, a slightly historical lens on FTEs, salaries and wages, sort of key technology, etc., only because we're still finalising that information at this point to come back to you with, but we want to give you that lens of this is the activity, this is why we do it, this is what we do, and this is what it costs effectively to deliver, this is how we deliver.
Is this new or is this, so I guess it would be helpful to understand a list of the activity plans that you think exist, whether they're the same as the ones in the LTP in terms of wastewater economic, or whether we're going to break them down further, because I can see this is where we might be able to get into OPEX. We've talked about a stronger focus on OPEX. This is the only place I can see in that we're doing that.
Correct.
So it'd be good to get a list and see how we've broken it down and how detailed we can get within departments.
So this is a new way of doing it in that you're seeing these up front and using this information to inform your decision making through the LTP process. The activity groupings themselves, we're proposing to update to more logically represent actually the way that we deliver services and support the delivery of those services.
And these are the same services.
They're the same services, it's just they'll be packaged differently than what you see in the LTP at the moment.
And there'll be alignment to the revenue and financing policy, so you can go that activity, say sport and rec, that percentage, that's what the designation.
And will those activity areas align with the management structure of the organisation?
Activities.
Yes, the activity areas, yeah. So there won't be shared activity areas
I think
between
it's
different
wrong. We're
departments?
trying to avoid that. We're trying to modernise it, but ultimately
Okay.
activity as a setting is a very financially embedded topic, and a lot of our architecture hangs off of that. So it's not quite as straightforward as something that we can just draw up on a daily basis. So it is based back in the finances.
Normally, in the past, we've given you this information as part of the draft LTP. You've received it. What this is us kind of saying, well, we're actually okay with bringing you into the workings of our staff, and this is very much their wheelhouses, and they do the work and review these activity plans, but it's bringing you in early on that conversation to influence the key things, in particular the levels of service, because we've heard that is a conversation that you want to have. So this is that opportunity to bring you into the workings in behind the review of the LTP.
It's a much more accessible way to think about these sort of topic by topic effectively.
And we can credit Catherine with this.
To the manager, yeah, it's my fault. And you'll have the manager of that activity coming and talking to you about it, so you'll.
Catherine's done this with
Christchurch and Canberra.
and so has introduced this, and we all went, oh, okay. So, but actually, I think it'll be it'll give you that transparency that some of you councillors have been seeking.
And the information itself is presented in a more accessible way than it's currently presented in the LTP as well, so that you can interact with it.
We'll have effectively a set of A3s that bring all of this information together.
But it will be, it's iterative and it'll be draft and there'll be working documents. So on that basis, we're happy to share and get guidance on them.
And this first version won't have all the information in it because we won't be at that point yet.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening and acting on what you've heard.
We always do, John.
Yeah, different way.
So what we'll also cover in these, yeah, we'll call them working activity plans because they will be working documents, is any major plans, not the CapEx plans, but OpEx plans, any planned updates or revisions to policy, strategies, bylaws, for example, that relate to that activity area, something that you requested, John, which I think is very sensible. The capital projects that relate to that activity area, but at this stage not prioritised, but as they link to that evolving infrastructure strategy. So you can sort of see the long list at this point, not the prioritised list. And
again, that was based on specific conversations with John about the fact that you wanted to see things that hadn't been prioritised as well as things that had. So this concept of, being able to see the long list and the looking at the 30 years before narrowing to the 10 years has come out of those conversations.
One of the activity areas specifically like to be risk management and audit function, and how much we've the discussion. So that can be one of the activities that thank you.
Just one comment, all for casting further ahead, I'm just conscious that we've never been very successful in delivering the later part of our LTPs at any level. Well, the things, it's always a rolling game. So I just want to, if we're serious about projects that are in this latter half of the LTP, we need to be serious about them, and we need to have serious money associated with them and serious development of the ideas and the business cases and stuff.
When you mean later, you mean like year 9 kind of thing?
Well,
year 3?
Anything in the back half, to be honest. Anything after year 4 is actually, nothing but a placeholder in my experience.
There still will always need to be that.
Yeah, I know.
And that's a lot of work that I don't think that we can possibly commit to, but I mean, I think I understand.
I understand that balance. I'm just saying that there's some that sit out there and stay out there in year 8 or year whatever, and they never get any closer. So we need to be taking action to get them closer if they're in our plan.
Or take them out.
Or take them out. But equally, we're always very good at telling everybody that our rates reduce in the latter part of the LTP, and that has never, ever occurred. Because it's easy just to go, don't worry, it's going to get cheaper in 5 years' time, and it just doesn't. So I think we need to be really honest about that.
Well, with the major change that will be the 3 waters out, but so it's probably we can say that this time with some certainty. But look, I understand that and hear that, but I think that will be quite problematic. But what I would say is that, as you know, you do get a chance to look at those projects that are out and consider whether you want to bring them forward. That can always happen. Those are political decisions.
There's a bit of a moving feast, though, isn't it? One example that stands out to me was the This Point Bridge, where it was in the long-term plan, relied on a lot of government contribution, and that totally changed on us after the long-term plan was agreed.
Yeah,
so
well,
it's going to be,
and we have this ironic situation. It'd be great to sit down with ORC and NZTA beforehand and work out what we're actually agreeing to fund, so we can actually, but they won't even consider funding it unless we're funding it in our LTP and vice versa. And so we end up with a standoff sometimes.
There was the National Land Transport Fund thing that came out after our LTP that completely changed the landscape.
Totally, and then we have to remove those assumptions. But if we don't even start with those assumptions, we don't even get a play at the NLTP, so it's like.
So in the transport space, Tony Pickard has some fabulous ideas about how to address exactly what you were talking about, Quentin. So when we get to talking about that, he will want to talk to you about exactly how we could approach that. Transport project, because I'm focusing on example, I'm trying to focus on examples that aren't better. In the transport space, some of those projects that we need to do are very expensive projects, and how you get them to the point of being able to call on government money or to get them started is an expensive process in and of itself. So you have to, as you say, be committed to delivering them. Hopefully through the regional deal, we will also be able to secure some prioritisation for funding through the National Land Transport Fund and through the RLTP, and yeah, so obviously those discussions are still underway, but we might be able to be higher priority through those processes in the future.
The other thing I'd say is for capital projects, we are collecting a lot more data on projects this time round, which will enable us to do more capital assurance work, which I think for those who were here last time, we started to do that capital assurance, kind of the doability, is it possible to do this? So because we've got that more data, we can do more of that analysis. So,
it'd probably be good to frame some of these big capital projects, and obviously the past have been constrained by debt headroom. We will not only have that headroom going forward, but we've also probably got the opportunity to do stuff off balance sheet. So where, are there options to remove those tensions about putting them in year 8 and hope we'll have some headroom and actually take them off balance sheet? But understanding how that all plays out together, that's possibly what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. So those kinds of things will be discussed as part of that revenue levers discussion. So what's your appetite for using things like the IFFA, which is, I assume what you're talking about with the off-balance sheet. The debt headroom isn't likely to be our issue going forward once water's gone out, but the rates capping is a different, and your appetite and the community's appetite for rates increases obviously is part of that conversation. I think for growth infrastructure, which a lot of these bigger projects are, then the variance process for the rates capping would be open to us, but your appetite for using that is still part of the conversation. Obviously, when we have that revenue levers conversation, that's still very early. That's, trying to get some, some vibes on it, as opposed to locking in the approach. Yeah.
I think the only other thing to say about the 10-year plan is that it's kind of a deliberate thing in that, we have councils come in for a triennium, and then, there's a new council, and a new council can look at the 10-year plan and go, what was the intent? And what are the existing live, decisions of council that have actually led to this being incorporated at all. So it's very much, that is part of the purpose of a 10-year plan. Sorry if I'm telling you how to suck eggs there, but...
Right, and then I'll keep on going. So yes, I think to your point, Councillor Gladding, this is kind of the OPEX picture. At this point on the journey, it's kind of previous OPEX for the activity, because we're busy beavering away in the background, we're refining up new OPEX numbers. But I'll show you where they come back onto the table, which will be in a couple of months after this one. And then,
or at this point, it might not be all the OPEX, it might be certain key things like staff costs, community funding, buckets, what is paid for delivery of external programs, that kind of thing.
And then if we said we want to change the level of service on that particular thing, then that can drive your...
We can take that away and refine what actually comes back in terms of the OPEX forecasts. And at this point, we also wanted to bring in another one of the policies, which is the significance and engagement policy. And again, similar to the previous ones, work through there what the big ticket items are.
So that's an obvious one that I can work with my chair and deputy chair, and we've discussed components of that and working through elements of what informs the policy with the Organisational Excellence Committee.
So then as we go into June, you get a second batch of activity plans, because we won't make you go through 21 of them in one session. So same story, but for the second iteration of activity plans. And also just as a, I guess, not more than a placeholder, but just, scheduling a reversion back on any updates around significant and forecasting assumptions. Because obviously those significant forecasting assumptions are becoming really important now in terms of the actual financial projections. And then into July. July is a big month. So having flexibility as to the way we approach this, maybe July as a heads up might be where we need more than one workshop, but we can see how we're going. So July, we want to bring to you the capital program as it is shaken out, utilising the prioritisation approach that has been refined and agreed upon through both today and the next workshop next month. So to give you that first cut of the capital program, as I say, has been through the prioritisation machine, but also making sure that we show you what hasn't formed part of the prioritised. Let's say you're above the line, below the line, or whatever, how we want to describe that. And also make sure that you're seeing that CapEx program by activity group. So
I think the other, just to note here that depending on what kind of prioritisation approach you want to take, this might not be a list of prioritised above the line, below the line. It might be a range of scenarios.
Yeah.
Where you can then discuss, how that's played out in terms of what the investment program looks like.
You can move the shape of the lines. And then also an opportunity here for us to take you through some of those key capital projects in a lot more detail. So I think last time you had some A3s on some key projects, and we're looking to repeat that process on some of those key projects.
Trying to do that proactively this time rather than having the discussions and then coming back with them. So
yeah, and obviously as we've been through some of these prior sessions of that first lens into the infrastructure strategy and also the activity plans, if there's particular projects that you're wanting to call out and saying, hey, we really want to see the deep dive on this, obviously, we should be listening. And then also at this point, just introducing the capital program risks. So what's the risks associated with not doing some things? That also, as Catherine referred to, we're looking at how we've done more of the capital assurance risk assessment through this program. So bringing risks to the table. And also in July, now saying, okay, we've been through the draft activity plans, we've had those discussions, maybe there's been some discussions around levels of service change, etc. Now we're bringing back what looks like projected OPEX activity. And importantly, and this is something that we're working hard on improving from previous iterations of LTPs, is making sure that we've tied CapEx and consequential OPEX together, so that when you're looking at projects, we actually are knowing there's a capital project here, maybe it actually generates some revenue, or maybe it has some cost saves, or maybe it has some operating costs that need to be factored in to the OPEX budgets. And obviously if capital projects are to move in and out of the prioritisation, we can actually move the related OPEX or operating revenue in and out of the plan.
So sorry, just to add, when we're talking about these first cuts of operating expenditure and capital projects, I think this is right. We now have a new financial tool that means that all of this can be modelled in real time. So when we are showing the capital program and the OPEX, this initial cut of OPEX, we can show the rating implications, and if you make changes, we can show the rating implications. In previous years, they've been kind of rough calculations, and then you get the final after all of this has been done, and that often looks quite different. Well, that was my experience last year. It looked quite different. So yes, so spreadsheets have now been systematised into a model, which means that as we're working through this process, based on discussions that you have, pulling different levers, what are the impacts if you pull this lever or pull that lever? We should be able to model that maybe not in the session and show you the information, but maybe, depending on how good it is. But certainly, it will be able to be done quickly and brought back to you. But some of it.
Will they be able to model it on OPEX for the next 10 years as well as
Yes.
the following?
Yes. Yeah. You can take things out easily, you can put things in easily.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean,
If you change your revenue and financing percentages, we can just literally.
So Penny stole my thunder.
oh, sorry.
But I'll see you over in the bike sheds later. So key financial metrics, an update on how the key financial metrics are developing, including indicative rates and borrowing. And you'll start to see that that becomes a checkpoint that we now keep bringing back to subsequent steering groups as things evolve. Catherine and her team will be having their magic system, will be recalculating these things.
It's not magic, it's very
quantitative. It's been a year's work.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So yes, you can see really July, very important steering group. That's really CapEx and OPEX, rubber hits the road, outcomes of everything that has come before it. Then into August, so this is where we start really forming up the actual strategies and content for the LTP. So this will be the first draft of the infrastructure strategy, result, as a product of the prioritisation discussions that have come before it. Not going to be all perfectly prettily formatted, but is giving you the draft content.
Have I ever bought anything here that wasn't prettily formatted?
I do have Penny formatting envy. But we won't sign you up for every perfect bubble on the page. But also making sure that we're clear how that infrastructure strategy has evolved, reflecting your feedback. And Catherine will be bringing the first draft of the financial strategy. And as I say, we'll keep these checkpoints in of how those financial metrics are evolving.
Question for Catherine. When does the world change? When do we click the button into new ratios, new debt, CCO takes over the water debt? When do we relook at because this all feeds into how much we can spend on infrastructure. So when does that happen?
1st of July 27, so the start
27.
of the start of the
So we'll be dealing in the old world until July 1st, 27.
Aligns with the LTP.
But this will two plans for the same date.
Yeah, so this will kick in, the new one will kick in, and so will the CC.
Okay.
We're way in advance. That's the way it works, and it's hard to believe it, but we kind of need everything pretty much baked in by this year. That's the way the LTP works. And I know it's a bit confusing given we're doing the annual plan at the same time.
Yeah.
That's hellish. Sorry, and it's a good question, Hugh, because it is bloody confusing.
But it's sort of like we're dealing AD and BC, two different sets of books, and we're looking at them across, and we're doing this.
That's how it works.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we do an annual report, which looks back even further. So,
but that's why we only have to do this every 3 years. So this is the pain time.
Or fun.
Fun time.
But, so we're doing pro formas on what our ratios look like in terms of how much we can borrow, right?
yeah, we'll be tracking as we're going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
All of which assumes that water is not in. So this doesn't include water. So all of these discussions.
It should clarify. The mist will rise.
It's all right.
It's okay.
Can deal with uncertainty.
Last time we assumed it was in, then it was out, then it was in.
Take it all out.
I'm just assuming we won't be
Change of
government and something else.
Yeah. You just have to keep, you have to be agile.
But effectively, we really have to start thinking now and dealing with ratios now, post July 1st, 2027. Right.
Then we come into, what else are we covering on August? I'm sorry. First draft of the revenue and financing policy, reflecting the conversations that have come before it, and also starting to show you, maybe not down to every single line item, but what's the impact of any changes in that revenue and financing policy settings on fees and charges? because that will obviously flow through into the calculations of fees and charges.
On that one, so we've got some pretty chunky policies in here that are really important, that we always go out with all the rest of the capital program and say, please tell us what you think. But it was all the capital program is, you know, based on this stuff, which is already effectively baked in. Nothing really changes in these policies after consultation, usually. So is there an opportunity for engagement on these pieces? I'm not saying consultation, but to say, here is our draft, this is what we're thinking with our, these are the changes, and highlighting them and getting some feedback from the community. It would be a whole different way of doing things, but at the moment it's councillor guidance only with nothing from, And look, people may not want to, it may be consultation overload, but I just think.
Can we have a think about that?
Of course.
Because, look, it's not just, you just said it. Is it realistic to be consulting the community about some of these policies? And but we're talking about a lot of workload here in addition to what we're undertaking already.
It's just feedback on key changes. So if we are looking to shift the dial a bit, these are quite serious, and you know, I just feel like consultation at the end on these policies doesn't really work.
But what we could do though, just thinking, as we go through this work, and I was going to come to it right at the end when we talk about the consultation topics, because that's not just something we go, here's a blank page and let's start having a conversation about. We've got, we've got comms expertise in the room, and all the way through this journey, they will be starting to formulate what the consultation topics might be. Now, in terms of the policies, if you were to say, I think that's quite an important, change in a policy that I'd like to make sure that we make very clear in our consultation of the LTP, we could actually capture that and then signpost those key things.
We did that for the significance engagement.
Signpost those key things as part of the consultation. I think I'm sure we can manage that as a starting point.
And I just like to think that it's not necessarily either or. Some of these things that are foundational, where if we were going to change it at consultation phase, it throws the whole LTP out. That's kind of not right. So I think it's a case of going, which things are fundamental and where are we making big shifts, and going out and saying, look, what are your thoughts? Not consultation, engagement, a thing on let's talk that says, look, because when you think about the energy that we put into some of our other policies and how it comes back to the table and we get community feedback, and then these are worked up very differently.
Yeah, can we ever think about that?
Yeah, of course.
I'm hearing that, and open to having a bit of a conversation about it. We may be able to do something. I'm getting a nod back here. But I don't think we'll be going, hey, community, now we're consulting on X policy in our run-up to the LTP. But it might be that we're flagging really early what some of these potential changes might be, and gleaning some interest and building that interest to the actual consultation. So I think that's we could do something with that.
Thank you.
The only other thing I was going to say is these sessions are obviously filmed, which we previously didn't do, so it is available.
And if you thought, I mean, it's worth saying, you are very, very welcome to go out into your community and have conversations. I mean, that's a given, really. And if there's any particular stakeholder that you think might be acutely interested in any one element of anything, by all means, approach them and say, you might want to have a look at this.
Given how significant some of these changes are with the reforms underway, is this an opportunity for, rather than an significant or an improved version of the special consultant procedure, and instead applying some participative democracy processes to some of these things, to say, look, here's an issue, get a group of people together, cross-section, and consider it in more depth, in a more focused way than we've tended to do in the past. Something to think about, not asking for an answer.
Isn't that us?
Yeah.
Isn't that us that have been put together by the community to approve these things and review
Look,
things?
we understand participative democracy, and we'll be talking about that a lot more, and we'll be discussing it through the new committee. But there are things that are extremely well suited to that process, and things that may just be too challenging for us again. Look, in a perfect world, you might do that, but I'm going back to, I only have a certain size team, we only have a certain amount of resource, and we're already under a huge amount of pressure just to get through all of the components of delivering this in a really positive way, with a whole lot of different new ideas to engage the community with. So, look, noted, and hopefully as we go through this triennium, you'll see that we have and are really open to bringing that style of engagement into how we work.
I'll just back up Megan's view there. Yeah, it is something we want to build our muscles in this space, and it will be really important that we pick those first few points of interaction really carefully to make sure that they set up to succeed in terms of scale and scope and interest. I would suggest that maybe some of these policy areas are probably a little dry to truly engage a representative sample of our community. Not necessarily, but some of them maybe.
Well, I was going to make that comment before, and it goes back to the comment I made earlier, I think, is that, you know, going, we want to engage with a community, revenue and financing policy is not going to really, but if you engage with them, we want to change the balance on growth paying for growth. You know, that's something that can resonate and get some innovation. And I mean, I still go back to the point I made before, is that unless we're bringing those big questions to the table, I think we're failing. I think we need to.
I can signal that the strategic growth team are particularly interested in this space, and particularly with regards to the Southern Waterford Structure Plan. I think there's some work underway that we'll be sharing soon in that space.
Cool. There's also, I mean, look, just to leave a thought in the air, we have to undertake genuine consultation, as you know, and so growth paying for growth is it's a very great. It's ambitious. It's a great, ambitious political statement. But we need to be very careful that we can actually deliver on that. So I'm just going to leave that there. But I think we all understand that that is the big driving desire of everybody in this community.
So I think the piece that we're not talking about is communication. So we're talking about consultation. We're talking about engagement. I think the key thing is the communication, so that Cody does a 30-second TikTok at the end of our revenue and financing policy workshop that says, this is what we've just talked about, this is where we're heading, whatever, so we're actually saying what we're doing, what are we thinking about, where we're heading and flagging it, because that communication piece is really key. And that's not the same as the engagement or the consultation, but we're taking people along the process.
We can bring in the constraints and the challenges as well, tell that story.
I didn't mean to dump you with that.
Okay, so as we head into September, so I don't know, to make up some weird analogy, we're starting to land the plane, circling the runway. So coming back on let's call them a final draft of the activity plan, so it's not final, but hoping that they're now starting to look pretty locked in. Provide an update on any CapEx or OpEx changes based on any new information that we might have had through this process, and then again the check-in on the financial metrics. Into October, we're now coming back with what should be the final drafts of all the key policies, including the dry ones.
We can have our 1-year anniversary party on that one as well.
Perfect. So these will be, again, the unformatted, not perfectly pretty versions, but all the right content. And introducing now the consultation topics. So there may have been these really key questions that has evolved through all of these workshops, all these steering groups, but now saying, what do we need this to apply?
And showing you all the changes. So
and yes, showing you all the changes.
That's something that we've failed to do in the past, and so making it really clear what has changed.
Yeah.
Get track changes.
versions. Well, yeah. We might do 2 versions because sometimes if we changes version, some people get,
Confused with the moving and the.
it's horrendous to look at and read.
We'll find a way to
We will.
do the comparison. And then into November, financial strategy, infrastructure strategy, some of the other policies coming in on the final drafts, fees and charges schedule that's come out of all of the work on the revenue and financing policy, on final look at what those financial metrics are looking like. So hopefully at that point, getting the go-ahead that this can all come back to you as a Christmas present with a little piece of cake on it for reading as you go into December and into the Christmas break.
And this is the point at which it goes to the auditors as well.
And so the auditors are going to be auditing the consultation document, and then the information that's attached to that, supplementary information, and then they audit it again on the final version, which will be in May, June. So they have 2 goes.
When we've got the consultation document as a draft, which it should have absolutely no surprises, and it will be as you have guided us. We'll circulate it to you. That's just the easiest way for you to then read it and give us your feedback. But just know, as Catherine's highlighted, the auditors get into it and then they require us to make certain changes to the consultation document, which is often a negotiation. But that's just, it's just so you know, there's a, despite all the beautiful Kumbaya piece of work that we do together to reach that point, the auditors can then come in and say, no, we want you to change this, or we want to.
So from an auditor's perspective, what are the key things they're looking at usually changing with what we submit?
They actually have, it always changes every year and every LTP, but effectively the Auditor General sits down and goes, what is my focus going to be in this LTP year? And you never really know what that might be. But I suspect it's probably going to be something around the transition of Three Waters. And I would bet good money that will be one thing that
Just
they'll
driven by policy, generally speaking.
a really close look at, and just meeting the legislation around delivering an LTP. Sometimes they want us to change the consultation topics, or sometimes they say we want you to leave that out, and we generally do negotiate our way through those sorts of things. So it's always difficult to say. Do you want to add anything?
You'll recall, those of you who were around for the last one, an example of something that the auditors raised and then we subsequently changed was we originally built in an assumption that for the major infrastructure growth projects that we would negotiate a 35% upfront payment from the developers to deliver those projects, to enable them to occur earlier in the timing. And the auditors basically said, because you don't have agreement from the developers to do that, you can't make that assumption. And so then we had to take that out, rejig the LTP. So that's the kind of example of where they might give us feedback that results in us needing to change something.
But equally, one year they had a focus on all the councils that declared climate emergency. Said, okay, you've declared this, what have you put in place and how are you delivering on it? So yeah, it can be something quite sort of strategic and non-obviously financial.
And as a growth council, we've always been an early audit. They always want to try and push us earlier and earlier because we're seen as a bit of a test case for them every 3 years. And then they go forth and they work with other councils, sort of like a pool of water ripple effect, until they finally get to bore, and then they write, this is being filmed. And they support other councils who are smaller than we are to really deliver fiscally responsible LTP. So we are always a focus.
Are they going to look at the well-beings, do you think? Do they think they're going to go into that area? Have they issued any guidance?
Where that's got to.
You'd think that they would do something up
Yeah,
front.
it will depend where that's got to, but then it is discretionary. So they tend not to sort of go into those softer spaces. So hard to say.
Yeah, I don't think they really looked at that much before, so I think it would be unlikely.
They go through every single KPI, for example, at length.
And they audit the process, so that they'll be looking at all these slides and going, you've had that conversation, where is that being reflected?
Yeah.
In the plan, so they
Well,
do.
one of the things, just to, I'm not sure, it might be too difficult, but I've seen views years ago with the regional council, where they actually came up with different costed options, for 4% on your rates, you got this, for 6% you got that, for 8% you got that. I'm not sure whether there's a role for that sort of exercise in us, providing genuine choice, so that people can see, what they're going to get, and that gives, I guess, us a really good steer on some of the things, and also maybe reduces the options of challenge for some of the things that we might do as well.
I think underlying all that, John, is that we have to have quite a clear pathway and a clear auditable pathway. So that's where those, that would be a nice thing to do, but I don't think that would pass muster for us.
I think realistically, we haven't had many choices in recent times, in that, we always, what are the have to do's, what are the should do's, what are the like to do's, and you don't even get to the end of the first paragraph.
We can only deliver one LTP, draft LTP, and if we were going to look at optioneering of rates, I think that's just a
I guess it's a value proposition. People will pay for what they value, generally. So we're making assumptions about what people value and what we want to charge them for, and sometimes people will pay more if they see what's in it for them, what's the benefits.
I mean, the advantage we have is a lot of the have to do's will be out of our hands, and so the choices, there might be more choices.
So that is certainly what we'll be modelling to you. So we anticipate that when we bring you particularly the capital program, that you'll be given different scenarios that are based on different importance being placed on different things and on different rate increases. So that's the beauty of the IBIS system this time, which we haven't been able to do in the past, is that we should be able to say, if you wanted to keep it to 2% and you thought this was the most important thing, this is a potential program. If you wanted to go to 6% and this was the most important thing, here's a potential program. So whether that flows through into consultation, that's much more complicated because you have to have the whole audited LTP ready by the time you go to consultation, but certainly for discussion with you, I would anticipate that we're thinking that that's where the prioritisation process will end up in terms of giving you scenarios to work through.
And then just one other question, coming back to the audit, I think last time I had a good look at a long-term plan, and there was all the financial assumptions. They all had a very high level of uncertainty attached to them. So to me, there's that sort of, we're going down to the detail, we're having very strict policies about how we may or may not give out a very small amount of money in the whole scheme of things to a few community groups. We're putting a lot of emphasis into that, with some very tight controls, levers and guidelines, and yet we've got massive uncertainty around our key financial assumptions. So
we don't talk about it as much.
Yeah.
How do we bring risk appetite and how do we get that risk layer looking at that stuff to see whether we're good at the right spot or not?
So that was in one of the early sessions, was talking about the assumptions, and the risk element can come into the assumptions, but also there's a specific risk lens when you get to the capital program, but that's a bit different to what you're talking about.
I'd just like to have the externals help us out on that stuff.
I mean, it may be in terms of reviewing the last set of assumptions, how did they play out? Is there anything to learn from
what we use as our assumptions about certain things, were they correct? I don't know whether
We're
that's
usually building on the assumptions in the form of plan, so it's actually, if that reflection comes into play naturally.
Yeah, so how certain are our capital budgets, you know, sort of, if you look at the last 15 projects where we had estimates, what were the actuals, you know, sort of, so how confident are we about our forecasting and our budgeting?
That does come through in the KPIs in the quarterly and annual reports as well. One of the risks we're looking at for the capital program is a deliverability risk, which would be based on,
So
I
you're
imagine, something like that, although that hasn't been bottomed out yet.
Right, but you're hoping to get to the early feedback today?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool, because some of that influences what John's talked about in the past and just recently. What the feedback is saying is a different set of priorities to what we're doing here. So, anyway, it's my motivation at this point.
And that comes to, you know, the challenge that you have.
Yeah.
Because you have to weigh that feedback together with what we're bringing to you. You know, it is feedback, and it's something that you can be mindful of at this stage. That's the beauty of it being early.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
Great, sorry.
No, you carry on, I'll do it then.
So I guess, I won't go back to it, but earlier in the slide deck, there is then the plan that kicks in next year, post-audit through to council approval of the consultation document and the draft annual plan in March out to consultation. So it's on page 6. And then I'll just wrap up with two components here, just around how we both capture and share guidance that we receive from these steering groups, and also the Q&A tracker. So in terms of steering group guidance, what we're proposing to do there is to capture the guidance and direction from these meetings. So I've made a bunch of notes today, and we'll be comparing those, and we'll circulate that back out to the steering group post each meeting.
No, I was just going to say to that, so it becomes very important that if you don't agree with something that's being said, join the discussion, because we can only write down what is, is coming up through the course of the discussion. No, and it may be that one councillor may raise something that nobody agrees with. And suddenly it's in here as, this is what we decided, or not decided, but this is the guidance that we received. So there will be times, I will flag and be honest, where this may be a little bit contentious, and you might want to bring back something that please pay attention to this, because it will be important to us. And if you need to bring something back and say, actually, I don't agree, or there was something that was really important that didn't get captured here as a piece of guidance, then bring that back to the next workshop. So at the start of each workshop, we're going to say, is there any discussion about the guidance that we received at the last workshop? And that's a chance for someone to say, I raised X and I want to have another discussion about that.
A question on that. So with the guidance, when you capture that from each meeting, when will we receive that to kind of make sure that?
You do it pretty much while it's fresh, actually.
Yeah.
I was going to say.
Because I guess that's the key, right? Because I've been in plenty of meetings where I'm like, I didn't think that's how it's. So I hear what you're saying. I think it's a really good idea to flag.
It was Nikki's suggestion, and it's a good one, and it just means that everyone's clear. And for our sake, we're clear on what the guidance actually was.
And I guess, then we really need to have a process. And I look to the mayor to this in terms of those sticky points, because, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty that we don't have complete agreement on, and how we will move forward without it being a decision.
In that case, do we need to then have a decision on it? If something is that contentious.
Well, these aren't decisions.
And we can't
If there was something that was fundamental, if there was something that was fundamental, whether it was somebody prior to the list or somebody else prior to the list, and we did not have anything even nearer
a settled position.
We could do
Then
a
as
workshop.
councillors, we
Meeting.
need to work out how we deal with that, and it might be we actually
We could
have to
do,
make a decision.
yeah,
Because
well,
it might be that staff will say, unless you can give us really clear direction, i.e. a decision, we're not able to take the process
I
forward.
think the word,
So
I would use the word consensus as opposed to a decision. So, yes, I think that is work that you would have to do. You would have to actually caucus your councillors and try and get some consensus for us without a decision, without having a separate meeting. But you could potentially, if it was something really meaty and you were all quite split on it, you could request of us a follow-up workshop, for example.
I think it'd be worth taking on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Because some matters will have a fundamental significance to the plan, others, there may be other ways to find that consensus or find conclusion.
Yeah, and maybe it becomes a big question or a,
Okay, so I guess we'll know when we get there.
And work with us on this. It's a new way of doing it. So, we'll just hone it as we go and see how it goes.
So for those of you who've been around for many of these plans, and many councils, and not only here but elsewhere in the country, so every set of councillors is going to want to set that mark or achieve that outcomes. From a reality check point of view, and if we're imaginative about how we do it, what is the scope to make a difference? Apart from the basic have to do things as usual and must-dos, because is our scope to influence in how we do the must-dos, or is it the nice-to-haves? And there's plans and there's frameworks. I started going through those slides and I thought, we're just going through a process with very little opportunity to influence, which is why I'm looking forward to the second half of the workshop. But I don't know, what's the reality?
So I think that's a good segue into the next session.
But I think what you're saying is, we are local government, so, it's obvious, but we do have to keep the wheels on the bus turning. So there are things that are non-discretionary and there are things that are discretionary. And you can influence how we go about the non-discretionary in certain aspects, but you can actually really influence the discretionary elements.
That would be whether we need a bus or a moped.
Yeah. Hopefully it's an electric bus.
It's interesting reflection because it is, look, it's hard. I'm not going to argue it's not hard, but there are times where the council have been able to identify priorities around, whether it be climate change or active transport or whatever, the things that we've been able to bring to the surface and prioritise. I think the other thing that we've been able to do, or that I've witnessed through different councils, is that it's an opportunity to set the tone about, and about, it's not even so much what we do, but it's like, just about setting the tone. And, I do reflect on the example of the Can-Do Council or whatever, it was a time, it was a mood, it was a tone that was set through the LTP that, at that time it was one to be more ambitious or, to plan better and to whatever, whether you agree with the outcomes of it or not, but the tone was set through this process. And it was, it goes back to those points I made before. I do think, I want to see us take the bull by the horns and try and, use this as an opportunity to make some changes in the areas that we can. And I think those areas are quite clear that we've heard from the community and what the needs are. We've got change coming at us, but I think we can, through the narrative and through our actions, actually set some tone. Cody was just wanting to.
Yeah. I appreciate the comments. Previously, just because I started a conversation, there has been meetings where I think Dave did it in some planning thing. At the end of it, have gone, okay, so this is what we've heard from you. This is what we understand some of the direction is. Just like a little moment to clarify, and everyone's like, yeah, that sounds about right. And that's also a chance to go, we're still not 100% on this, and it doesn't feel like we've built a really strong consensus, so maybe there's more work to do on that. We'll do for next time, which is something we can, steer with councillors in order for the next meeting to come to you and be like, right, we've had a discussion and this is how we feel like we can move. It feels like a really pragmatic, soft skills way of implementing that, and I really like that you're bringing that in, and I think it's a great initiative. In terms of the tone and setting, I feel like for me, the last term was winter, where we basically just had to sit down and hibernate and get through whatever it was. But the great part about winter is that the next thing is spring. And given that we're moving into an environment that has a lot of change in a lot of other parts, it's an opportunity for, a lot of new shoots and new ideas and things to grow and shape, which is why.
Work, Katie.
Wait for summer.
Which is why, well, summer's the testing
down in the
phase.
weeds if you're not there.
But, summer's, well, this is all Tony Robbins. But, summer's testing phase. To see if it works, and then autumn is harvest. So, I do feel like we're coming into an environment where I want to be a part of a culture that is looking at it as spring, that is looking at it as new opportunity, new growth, some change, some sort of like a different shift in thinking, and to build a culture that we can actually move the needle rather than being, told what to do and then everything what it is.
If I may, can I add to Cody's weak point, being told what to do? My take on it is, or my opinion on it is, we stay a little bit agnostic from the government of the day, who keeps chopping and changing every 3 years, and the well-beings to me is the one that I think we need to protect and guard, because we are the guardians of this district. Central government cares about the whole country in a broad brushstroke, whereas this district we're in charge of. And if we take the well-beings out, as the policy says, basically, the next government may bring them back in. So I think we almost have to ignore, to a degree, these policies, and it's good to see. But I guess from my perspective as an individual councillor, I'll be protecting the well-beings, because that's what makes living in this district better than any other district. That's why we live here. That's why people choose to live here. We are high growth. When you look at the high school, it's had its largest induction of new students, and we're going to continue to grow. And if we don't deliver that social infrastructure, we might as well live somewhere else.
And just to reinforce that, I think that you flip the narrative and going, how do we deal with the impending visitors? It's like, well, how do we look after our residents? That's the sort of thing that we need to change in.
And hopefully all of you returning councillors can point to something that you have, in your heart that you have influenced and made a decision about, but it's now been delivered. And that is, I think you'll really enjoy the consultation process, the hearing process, and actually getting to genuinely influence the LTP, the draft LTP, and bringing something like active travel in Wanaka was very much, a response to the consultation process. So it is a very genuine process, but at a high level, it's your council, and I guess Penny's itching. I can feel her tapping away to just take you through this.
I was going to suggest that John was just wanting to make one comment. Did we want to work through to one, or did we need a 5-minute break at any point?
Probably, yeah.
If I could give you just one thing to take into the break, so we don't lose the thread of the question you asked, I think would be good.
Well, I'll make an observation and then maybe you could do that. So you asked the question, John, what we've seen in other places too. So although, go back to Cody's comment, have you been in a beer cave in the springtime? Not a good place. Anyway, but there's no statutory limitation to how we give direction or make decisions here. If there are points where we need to make a clear decision because there are a range of issues and that we can't reach consensus, and I've worked in other local authorities where that's been the case, we need to actually have that debate. We need to get some good advice, some recommendations, and make a clear decision to then move forward. Rather than, it would be ideally, we'll be able to work it through, but sometimes we might need to make a decision, and we shouldn't be scared of that.
I have one sentence. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, the reality is that, not everybody needs to agree.
Yeah, that's right.
And we'll probably end up there on a number of matters, and that's okay.
Mine's just on pre-reading. This is all in public now, and these are going to be really chunky topics, and sometimes there's going to be a whole lot of reading all at once within a session. How far ahead of those sessions can staff commit to providing us with the pre-reading? And I know it will vary slightly, and it's become much better, but it can slip when things get busy.
So whatever the standard timeframe is for 4 workshops, which I think is 5 working days, is what we're committing to, because there is a huge amount of work that has to happen between each of these sessions.
5 days is great.
And
if we can do it sooner,
but that's, given the amount of work, it's unlikely. Which is what you should have got this time.
Yeah, fantastic.
And it was
So
ahead of the weekend, right, this time?
Yeah, which is
We were determined to have 5 working days.
So I think the concern is not on the morning of the workshop.
Yeah. That's why I'm raising it.
No.
Perfect, thank you.
Did Penny want to spring into something?
I just wanted to, so to John's question about where is your opportunity for setting directions, and is it about how, or is it about what that direction is? So what all of these slides are about are that the LTP operates in a complex environment, and the LTP is, so before you get to setting an LTP, you have already committed to a bunch of things. So there are things we have to do statutorily, and actually with this LTP there'll be less of those because a lot of those were water. There's still some of them, and there's those kind of must-dos, but then there are also things that you have committed to as a council. Some of those things that you've committed to are statutory once you commit to them, and some of them are not, but you have committed to them and you have set that expectation with the community. And so the LTP is really about how you look at the things that we have already committed to, either because we had to or because you've made choices, or your previous councils have made choices, and how we deliver on those promises that we've already made. So it's the how you put all of that together and direct our resources in terms of our capital and our people and our community funding to deliver on a range of things that you have already discussed with the community and agreed with them. So in that respect, kind of setting new direction through the LTP, there is some opportunity for that, but you have to look at the things you have already promised to the community. And we haven't been very good, and so I'm saying last time because I was only here for one. At the last LTP, we weren't very good at saying to you, this is what you have promised the community. And in order to deliver on that, you would need to do all of these things. And how do you want to make choices between those? So what we're trying to do this time is, and I'll go through that, but I'll have to skip through it because of time a little bit. But I think it's really important that it is about the how, but this time we won't. It's going to be tricky because you won't have some of those, the borrowing limit constraints as in the past, and the rates numbers will look relatively low compared to what you have dealt with in the past. And so you will have discretion to say, so the spatial plan, for example, so we're going to have new requirements under the Resource Management Act where we have to respond to growth. That's different to last time. Where we had more discretion. How we respond is where you can make decisions. Active travel is a thing that's been deprioritised by the government, but you might decide that is a priority. But that'll have flow-on implications to rates and so I'll step through that a bit more, but I think just to your question, John, the LTP is about how you give life to the things that you have, the expectations that you've set with the community. Levels of service, strategic direction, land use, all of those things. So it's a very complex beast, boiled down into 50,000 workshops.
Should have started a few years ago.
Through the activity plans, is that when we're going to be?
Oh, we can talk about that after the break,
okay.
but yes.
But yeah, big.
Penny, just a simple question for somebody who's brand new. So for instance, you mentioned active travel, which has been diminished by the current government. If we put in things that are not part of central government policy, are we likely to get those knocked back completely by the auditors? not by the auditors.
No, it just means we don't get the co-funding.
Yeah, you'll have to
So-
100% pay for them.
So in the case of the active travel in Wanaka, the NZTA hadn't committed to 50% funding or whatever, but we decided to fund it anyway. Now, the upside of that was we actually got some co-funding from government down the track through the transport choices. So the fact that it was there actually attracted the money later on. So, but the point is, we had to go, no, we're gonna do it because it's been so strongly voiced by the community, but we're going to fund it 100%.
All right, so these are massageable.
Yeah.
But don't forget, this government is bringing rates capping. So that's another discipline that's going to be applied to us, to you, that we will need to bear in mind. And that's where it becomes really important that you have some structure to, some rationale to your prioritisation.
Yep, and so the variation process for rates capping, if it's related to growth, there will likely be a kind of easy path through that variation process. If it's not related to one of the government's priorities, we should expect pushback from the regulator of the rates capping. However, if our community has clearly signalled that they want us to invest in that and are prepared to pay for it, then that's different. That would feed into the variance process.
I mean, there's a bit about growth, though, that goes back to my comment before, is that if we're leading the development contributions correctly, we're not having to worry about funding growth through rates. So, I mean, that's the whole point. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
So just in my head, so 3 years ago, there was an LTP agreed that said we were going to do things in years 4, 5 and 6.
Mm-hmm.
How much scope have we got to deviate away from what we said we'd do in years 4, 5 and 6 as part of this process? Is it complete clean slather, start again scenario within?
Except the fact that we have to do something.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just trying to understand the constraints. Do we have constraints on what's gone previously? And if we wanted to go quite differently away from what we said to the community we would do in years 4, 5 and 6, how much do we have to do extra consultation on what we're proposing to go away from, or are we just consulting on the whole?
We just consult on the whole, but the idea is that we should do 30-year planning, and then the LTP is about what can we afford, but what can we afford and what are our priorities to kind of front load in terms of the things that in each of the areas that we're looking at. If those change every 3 years massively, then our chance of ever delivering those things in the out years, or even the things in the in years, decreases, because for a lot of, particularly the big infrastructure projects, there's a long lead-in time to get those projects up and running, to get them into the national processes, to get attract funding, and so and the first part of what you see will be the officer's view of what the priorities are in each of these areas. That's where you can then put your lens and priorities over them to adjust them. But you wouldn't expect things that are in years 4 to 10 to disappear. They might move. Right. There might be new things added. Right. It's certainly not a blank slate each time.
Well,
because this is
technically you could change everything, but the answer is that we shouldn't, because there's reasons why they're there in the first place. Now, the other side of this is politically, we don't want every government to flip and change everything every time. We want some consistency, and we should respect the decisions of the people to some degree that came before us and those that will come after us. We expect them to, to honour what, the path that we've set to a degree. I mean, it is our time to make our mark on the planning and the 10-year plan, and it's our position to do that, but we shouldn't just throw it all out.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the constraints of what we can do.
But we can. I mean, it is technically, we can change anything. But that's
any
not the
diesels
reality.
collected on a capital project would then potentially be at risk of needing to be refunded, right?
No.
If you've collected something on something in a plan,
I think we're getting down.
and we don't do it. Well, I'm just saying that is a financial constraint because,
the other thing is that for this LTP, when you strip out water, it'll look kind of weird because the sequencing was done with water projects and transport and waste
Yeah,
and
to
community
manage-
services,
manage
and when
the
you
debt.
strip out water,
Right.
it's,
Yeah.
as you saw from the profile that we talked about.
But I think to understand what was in year 4 and 5 and to recognise that there may have been significant staff work towards some of those things is probably key, because we don't want to just like that, and there's been a whole heap of
Right,
effort.
and they were well understood by the last council,
Yeah.
and they decided that they should be in those years. So you do start with having a good hard look at those things and considering if they're still the right decision.
It's interesting, you look at some of the big projects in Wellington and even Dunedin, the George Street, and all this sort of stuff. There's so many of these new mayors and stuff with campaign on saying, I'm going to stop this. And, you know, you see the first papers come out over the last 2 or 3 months and they go, oh, this is sort of the train.
Shouldn't really slow this down.
I still don't like it.
Yes.
So we could find 5 minutes.
Start with some more assumptions, don't they?
Okay, folks, we'll take 5. And then Frank, carry on. Thank you.
DC policy every 3 years. Projects in years 1 to 3. Everything policy.
Yeah, they did. They were given every single thing they were asked for. Right. Yeah. Every single item not back on their budget.
So, right. So, yes, you've got project X, so here, you've got project Y here, and you've got project Z. So Z is included in the policy, and it's delivered. It might be delivered in year 6, it might take 3 years to deliver. But it's key to get up with the policy.
And when that happens in Midfood, I just don't get
Don't charge you. And once the project starts in.
But if
Once the project, so yeah, so a project that was planned for year 4, the new set of councillors go, no, we're not doing that. Wouldn't have been in that policy. It would have been only in the policy from the new LT. So oh my God, no, don't have to refund anybody anything. I'm not refunding. I'm not.
The rates start.
It's a bit cheaper with most.
You know how we were like, oh,
Next station on SARS.
Ironically, they'd already identified that as being a problem.
It's very complicated, it's formula, even Taitoa, just last week, the webinar just said it's just crazy, it's not.
Just answer my question.
Yeah, the DC?
You took us now, let's just pretend that it's July 1st. Right? And any debt related to water around the CCO, the asset of the CCO. And a lot of revenues because everyone's going to get their raise. So you're going to go there. What's our ratio? What's our new ratio? So right now we're doing. Right? So would it be, is it a motion if there would be 280 again?
I think it goes down to that.
it is, but then how do we build it? Do we build it by going, look, bring them in, by all means, put it together, and if they are, then we don't want it.
First 3 years.
If we were to buy
So what you're saying is, and they're taking 500 million of debt. What? And so if I'm in the new CCO, I'm immediately going to start raising.
They want us to, we've said it, and then we
Yeah. Just for fun, right? So let's just say our revenues are 750, right? And our debt is, no, I've got that wrong. 750 is our debt. Our revenues are 2 something, right? 250. No, right now. 250, right, and that equals about 2.8, right? And then in the new world, water will be, we'll have 500 million debt, right? Really? And then, so this is.
Helen, we've got 5 minutes. You've got about 1 minute.
Okay, so, yeah, we don't know, the revenue. You're saying it's going to, that number's going to be 80. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it different. Because that's like a
And they get the same respect, you could be asking the question now about what's our legacy.
Wheels, this is what we do. Otherwise, it could be any two states. That could run those off the street.
The reality is, the local government is deciding where to do is about commissioners or with new laws, people landscaping, then it's advertising. And I think at the same point, crowds need to change, areas and stuff.
It's why I'll bring a plastic, one of the kids' plastic spoons, because if I do the visual motion, it's like, and I'm like,
We had 3 people yesterday. They had opening a pump track. I'm sure someone will think it's been.
That's amazing. That was the best product I got to do this market.
Okay, people, I think we should bring the workshop back to the table.
Somebody else's.
That's cool. And
Just get confirmation that we're recording. We are recording. Thank you. Ready.
All right. So just leading on from what we talked about before, I'll go through these first bits maybe a bit more quickly because we did just talk about it, but I just wanted to make sure this information is all kind of there for you. We've got all these interrelated parts and we've got a lot of external requirements. So that is a thing that is changing, and it is increasingly, we're increasingly having central government set expectations and requirements for us, and each LTP that increases. And that is not just under the current government, that happened under the previous government. This government has lent into it in different areas and some of the same areas. So that's an important context that we need to think about when we talk about prioritisation. There is an increasing list of things we must do. We have a bunch of our own strategies. But they're the way that we deliver on that complex system. These are the key ones that we'll be looking at through the LTP, and just a change for this approach is that we will be talking to you about those strategies, because those strategies have set expectations with the community about things we're going to do. So we'll be talking about what those strategies say that we are going to do, what investment would be required to deliver on them, and how that relates to levels of service, and flowing that through into the activity plans and then the choices that you make in terms of where we invest. That's just what that says, so I won't belabor that. This is just kind of for each strategy, we have this list of actions, and we don't usually in the LTP process go through the whole list to say what it would take to deliver this. So that's part of what you'll be seeing this time in the consolidated program. The spatial plan. So I think it's just an update this time is that under the resource management reform, so under the planning bill, the spatial plan has more weight. Technically that'll be our next spatial plan, but what this signals is that there is an expectation that we plan to enable growth, not constrain growth. So that's a key concept that was embedded in the National Policy Statement for Urban Development at the last LTP, but the current reforms have strengthened that position, which makes this a less discretionary activity. But it's also, I just wanted to flag that the next iteration of the spatial plan is now going to be a regional spatial plan, maybe a sub-regional spatial plan, and the work on that will be happening as we're doing the LTP. So we'll be having discussions through the LTP about growth scenarios and what that means for our investment, at the same time as Anita and Ali will be coming and talking about what the next version of the spatial plan looks like. And so we just have to be a little bit flexible there in terms of, they'll inform each other as we move through it. The climate biodiversity plan is one this is not a thing that the government requires us to do, but it's a thing that we did, that you've recently recommitted to, and it's clearly outside the core services of government, but something our community and I'm pretty sure our council feel very strongly about. And so that plan outlines investment intentions for us and for QLDC. So this is one of the plans that we'll be bringing with this will be embedded more strongly in through the infrastructure strategy, but also through the activity plans. And we'll be looking at the climate scenarios in terms of the different options for the long-term investment. Now, I should just flag that'll be at an early stage of maturity, so that won't be a fully mature process, but it should be a step up from what we did last time. So the 30-year infrastructure strategy is, so the next session will be on this in more detail, and we already kind of touched on this, where usually we look at last time we looked at the 10 years and then built out the 30 years. What we're wanting to do this time is talk to you early about what the significant issues are that drive the infrastructure strategy, what that 30-year vision is, and to have the teams think about that 30-year delivery program before we then look at what we can afford to do in the 10 years. Now, obviously 30 years is a long time, and there's not a lot of detail in those, as you get further and further away, and we do already have 30-year views for all of our main infrastructure areas, but that'll be talked about in more detail in the next session. The financial strategy is a key part of this because that's where we set all those financial constraints. Enablers, settings. I won't go into that. We've covered a lot of that in what Ian was talking about, and that spans a number of the workshops. And we, through that process, need to bring in the focus from the local government system improvement reforms, which is a new requirement to deliver infrastructure and services that are cost effective, which is defined as value for money. Being value for money provided by using resources effectively, economically and without waste, and by taking into account the total costs and benefits of any decisions. So that is a new requirement, and that's something that will be built into the process in terms of how we present things that come through this process, and it'll be built into the financial strategy. One of the other things that will drive our first cut of what investment looks like is that we have developed already structure and master plans for different areas, the most recent being the structure plan for the Southern Corridor, which sets out when infrastructure is needed to service the growth that's happening there. So this is kind of the next layer down from the spatial plan, and should be informing that first cut of when infrastructure is needed. So I'm just trying to, there's a lot of things that are going to feed into what you get put in front of you, and we're just trying to make sure that you have that kind of macro understanding of all the things that feed in. From an asset management planning perspective, all of our asset areas, asset types have asset management plans that set out how we manage and look after, renew those assets. The government has a much stronger focus on asset management practices generally. It's one of the criticisms they've put on local government, and it's one of the areas of focus for setting up for economic regulation of water. So what we are anticipating this time is that when you see the investment program for renewals, and things for renewals, that there'll be more information about how we determine those renewals based on these plans. So again, not just presented with a spreadsheet with some lines that say renewals, but some more information about how we, the royal we, obviously aren't doing any of that. These guys, how we came to that. So as we talked about at the beginning, the LTP is the point at which all of those things come together, and then you have to make choices about which ones of them we can do. Which takes us to the, sorry, before we go into the prioritisation. So the way that our strategic framework works is it's the kind of common language that we try and use to link all of these things together, and it shows how we get from our community aspirations to down to what are the priority areas that we want to focus on to deliver to those community aspirations. So I won't go through the detail of this because we went through that in the induction, but what I just wanted to highlight is whether we are planning or proposing to make any changes. So the first layer being the community outcomes. These reflect what was shaped through Vision Beyond 2050, which was a process with the community, and they reflect our community's aspirations for themselves. And they have been built into not just our own strategies and approaches, but also those developed by the community. And they underpin a lot of community-led initiatives. So we're not proposing that we change those, and there's no changes that are indicated through the reforms that would indicate that we need to change those.
Are we comfortable to still valid?
That's a question for you, but I think we would be comfortable that they're still valid. They're still being actively used and referred to by the community. The community seems to connect with them. They're somewhat, so one of the reasons we have layers in this framework is because we have to be able to translate that into something that applies to council services so that we can prioritise and that we can, so that they're usable in application for delivery of services. And some of those community outcomes aren't that, in terms of the way they're framed, we have to go through a process to get them to something usable, but the community connects with them because they speak to what they care about.
It was actually a beautiful process. I'm not being, it really was, and they were meant to be enduring for 50 years literally, and held. And I mean, I was just looking at them the other day, and they do still really resonate, I think, and that was very deliberately done. I don't know if you want to comment, Michelle. We were both really heavily involved in that, but and we brought in.
It's quite interesting, It was, and it wasn't. It didn't feel controversial, or there was no. It was collaborative, and it
was community led.
It was community led, and it wasn't a council SCP, and it wasn't. There's a whole bunch of things it wasn't, which was made it what it is, probably. Okay, sorry to go down that road.
No, that's a good question.
One of the questions. So, in all those frameworks and things, whether it's the waste side of things. Obviously, there's going to be a drive maybe towards shared services between councils, or even parts of councils merging. Is that all going to, in your opinion, is going to be completely beyond the timescales that we're working with? That we're not going to, because we could go through a 10-year planning process, and in a year's time everything changes, or we get a whole heap of stuff from the regional council, or whatever. So I guess how do we future-proof that, or we just wait and see what happens when it happens?
So we're not going to have enough, any certainty, not even certainty, we won't even have options to talk about. So one of the assumptions for this LTP is that we continue without water. But obviously alongside moving water, we have to do our own kind of QLDC of the future. One of the things to consider in that space is ensuring that we set ourselves up to be flexible and responsive to changing direction in the future. But for the purposes of the LTP, that work will inform the LTP. But in terms of, whether we merged with somebody else, whether we were the host of shared services, whether we had shared services delivered by somebody else, there's too much uncertainty in the space, because we're not going to get the simplification legislation until middle of next year, and then the CTB will have 2 years to come up with their plan. And then it's not implemented until after that, which is basically when we'll be doing the next LTP.
I just want to, I'm just looking, and it's just words, but we're not without water. We're still the owner of the company. We still have to be directing it. It still has to be integrated with everything else that we're doing. Where we set our rates is going to relate to where the water company can set its rates. It's going to have to be integrated. The risk is going to have to be managed. I just want to make sure that the organisation, the words that we use, don't sort of separate it too much.
That's a good point. And
it's still ours.
Yeah.
In so many ways. Sorry, and there wasn't meant to be a
criticism.
I'm just trying to think what I said that was related to that.
Well, we do talk about it quite a lot.
We don't have what have we gone, what has not gone,
right.
just the phrase.
Well,
I get where you're coming from.
Just in terms of our LTP consideration, but
just to set the culture and mindset.
So because there is a lot, when we get to the prioritisation, and you'll see why one of them might appear to be the one that we preferred, because there is significant integration when we are planning for how we deliver infrastructure and services in the future, particularly when you're talking about growth, because we have so many priority development areas in terms of sequencing where investment happens and ensuring it's aligned between the water entity and us. That is going to be critical to the future success delivering on
which relates to how that political decision around how hands-on we're going to be and how far we're going to go about. The next step of this is the wellbeing outcome stuff. We're not going to change that, even though it's been taken out of the Act, or is being taken out of the Act. We don't actually think it precludes it from being included. They've just done some tricksy words in there, but also it's clear from you that we don't want to.
Just also worth noting that was a collaborative framework that was put together with the ORC and all of the Otago Council, so that's not just an us piece of work.
No. So now the next part that we just need to have it's really an introductory chat today about this is the core activities. So obviously the services that we provide, the investments that we make relate to the activities we deliver. And the System Improvements Bill redefines the purpose of local government and defines what's core. Now, what it doesn't do is define what's not core, and it is through that bill there is going to be DIA will be implementing monitoring of expenditure against core and non-core services. That doesn't mean there's nothing in the legislation that says we can't do those things. But the expectation is focused on ensuring we deliver on the core services. You can still make choices and the community can still decide that core service, non-core services are important and should be invested in, but we should expect to get scrutiny on that from DIA, and if we want to go through a variation process for rates, that there would be scrutiny put on things that are deemed non-core. Now, one of the
boondoggle projects that they did not define.
Sorry?
Boondoggle projects. Once you've got it on there.
Yeah. So one of the idiosyncrasies of the bill is that it says, it lists these core services, and then it defines the purpose of local government as providing these things on the right, and they don't necessarily match up. So we're essentially left with having to fulfil a statutory purpose that relates to things that are non-core. So regulated functions is outside of that list of core services. Support for local economic growth and development is outside of those core services.
Regulatory functions could be outhoused, so they don't necessarily have to sit with local government.
I think because when they've done that, we had it outhoused and it was a mitigating failure.
Matt was.
I think they've said because their legislation, there's other pieces of legislation which, not the Local Government Act, that might cover it. Yeah.
I was just wondering if we can get some guidance on the nuance of what's core versus what's not, as opposed to from the government's perspective versus what we think, because you've got community and recreational facilities as core, and this is the one of the things I'm really confused about is, so we have to, from a statutory point of view, we have to deliver on that, but then in another sentence we might be saying we don't.
No, so it's more that there are things in the purpose that looks like they're broader than the core services, but the core services are the things they expect us to be investing sufficiently in. And they are these things on the left: network infrastructure, which really is roading and transport infrastructure, waste management and minimisation, civil defence, emergency management, libraries, museums, reserves, and other community and recreational facilities.
So I know I've got Ken and Simon in the background there. How does this affect what you currently deliver on?
Oh, before you answer that,
It's not the how.
This really is talking about infrastructure. It's talking about the hard.
So keeping the infrastructure.
The hard, well, emergency management, not so much. But what you'll see, they don't define what's not core, non-core in the bill. But there are a range of government papers, cabinet papers, briefing papers for ministers that talk about what they see as non-core services. So community and recreational facilities are on the core list, but sport and recreation, as in services, is what they put into what they think is a non-core category. So not officially through the bill, but through papers. And so this is what you're going to have to work through as you work through the activity plans to determine what you think is core on the service side. But sorry, I'll let Ken answer the question now.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry to put you on the spot, Ken.
Look, I mean, you take Jane and Joe and the Otago Highlanders on Friday night up against the Mighty Crusaders. I would argue that's definitely a core outcome. But the realities are we're in this game of creating healthy, connected, livable communities. You're not going to get that just with bricks and mortar. So the challenge, I don't see it's you, I think it's us collectively, because we're already suffering at the whims of the reform. The community push back and request, changes in service. And we have many touch points. If you just look at what we do in libraries, sport and rec, we really have made sure we have a bespoke response to the needs of communities right across the 6 largest districts in the country. We don't just do one thing in Wanaka and replicate it in Glenorchy. We make sure we do what Glenorchy needs in response to the community. So through this next phase, we actually think this will be one of the key challenges for us in a moment when you snap out 3/4. What are you left with, what is the baseline on the cabinet, and particularly what comes with the 7 November election is what the worship's really pointed out. So, I guess we flip this on its head. What our KPIs will be telling this audience and our community that we continue
QLDC are soaring interest in a range of sport, recreation, environmental, creative economies, you name it. There's not currently a shortfall on anything that this community is expecting to be able to access via some of these channels or partnering with others to make that happen.
And this is where, when you're looking at the activity plans and you're making choices about our strategies and the things we've committed to the community, if those are the things that are still important to us, then they're the things you want to invest in. So
John and then Cody.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting looking at this bigger context, because if we look at the Vision 2050 document, given what we're going to be talking about later in the week, says that our waterways and lakes will be drinkable. So, you know, if we've got, although it's not a statutory document, there's some guiding principles in there that should inform how we make decisions. Similarly, I know the point was made earlier, I think, yeah, there's a broader range of legislation, because the four well-beings and the emergency management bill, which also consultation closed on this weekend, they're still there, absolutely, in the purpose statement. So, and that's us, local authorities are primarily responsible for that. So, and in a whole lot of ways. So although the government is sort of saying they're taking it away, they're not. It's much like the rates capping. It's largely window dressing, and we need to get on and do the best we can to meet the needs of our communities within all of that noise.
Yeah.
I'm just going to add a point to the previous conversation around sport and rec. I'm assuming that they're going, the rec centre is core business, the pickleball, you know, weekly thing is not. It's like the soft skills versus hard infrastructure, or soft infrastructure versus hard infrastructure, is I think the delineation on the spectrum of needs and must-have. The sport and rec is obviously in the middle, and I guess that's why it's hard to segment into that sort of way of thinking.
Or are we saying that the swimming pool is core infrastructure, but the learn to swim services are not?
Yeah. So that's the implication of what they're saying. They're saying it is too difficult for the community to work out how to build this infrastructure themselves. That's what councils should be responsible for. But some of these services are things that might be nice to have if you are having cost pressures that are putting increasing rates. Focus first on these things before you think about those other things. And as Ken said, and you just talked about, that is not how we deliver on the aspirations for our community, or for, you know, on the well-being of our community.
Well, I was just going to come back to Cody and John Mitchell's match. You know, like we just talked about the revenue and finance policy that Catherine oversees. You know, we are well clear about that. We need to get 60% of the revenue back through the venue doors. So if you just take swimming lessons as the example, we currently have a bespoke model where we deliver services alongside the private sector, and you know, we continue to see that there's more of that activation required of us. You know, we've done Project Tahu in partnership, we've had trusts invest, we've had philanthropists invest. We continue to see that being our model. But what we do want to recognise, and I think this is audience gets it, now what a community get it, they do not wash their face. So it's a constant question of us asking, are we adding value in the right spaces? Is bang for your buck.
But also, I mean, just that point, if they expect us to provide a swimming pool, which it sounds like they do, swimming pools don't generally wash their face. If we find it out in the private sector around the services, how do we get certainty around our revenue side? Therefore, it puts the whole plan at risk.
I don't actually think they're proposing that. They don't.
It's just what the wording of the bill
is. As with much of what has come through in these reforms.
Yeah, it's not well thought through.
They don't necessarily understand the practical realities of local government and delivering the services that we deliver, which is why it's not a cut and dried thing in the legislation. It's here's the direction. They're going to put in monitoring over it, and they're, you know, if you want a variance because of the rates cap, they'll put even more monitoring on it. But it is going to be up to you. And I don't expect that they think those things are going to go out to the private sector. I think they're using this as a tool to make sure that we look carefully at what those things cost and where we invest.
I think the Prime Minister called it daft stuff.
Yeah.
Daft stuff. Sorry about my list. So we don't want councils doing daft stuff.
Yeah.
And then someone's taken that as a guidance and a government wonk and written this. And it's a little bit how I feel about the well-beings. It's like do-si-do over the 20 plus years I've been here. But we've always, ultimately, you come back to why you're here, and that is to serve the community, as you all know. And as best we can, our policy has always been to apply user pays and to limit the cost. When there is a cost to the community, our LTPs and our consultation processes are very, very, very clear about that. I think it just comes down to managing your way through, not getting too. I actually raised, do we have to call our activities core and non-core? Because I don't think it's fair to call an activity that is beloved by our community non-core. So, I think it's just a matter of working our way through this in a sensible, pragmatic way.
Sure.
I completely agree. I just think it's worth noting there's a lot of water to go under the bridge with these pieces of legislation. Yeah. There will be at some stage some clarity around core and non-core. We don't have it yet. There is also lots of political wins in relation to this. As we already highlighted, the systems improvement bill, rates capping, the taking the wellbeing. None of these things actually are a part of an integrated program, and then they're not syncing neatly together. So I think this will be one of those areas where we're going to continue this conversation, and as more information becomes available, bring it back into the discussion. Because we don't
like you say, when they say, oh, we don't want you to build sports grounds, it's like, well, are Sport New Zealand stepping up to it's like, there's no replacement here. So it's like, if you wanted to have a centralised offering, then okay, we'll talk about it, but that's not what they're doing, they're just cutting.
I'm just assuming that part of our audit of our LTP will probably delve down into some of this stuff as well, as to whether we're complying with the legislation or not.
Well, because this isn't the type of legislation, it's not so much about complying or not, it's more about if it's trying to focus where we spend money. It's not saying we can't spend it on these other things. So the way that this should inform our discussions is, where do we have more discretion, which are more discretionary than others? If we're making choices between something on this list versus something on this list, then we need to take that into account. But it is still our discretion and our community's discretion about what is invested in at the moment. But as Michelle says, we haven't, once the legislation is in place, we might find that we're subject to some very stringent KPI metrics reporting from DIA, but then what happens with that? At the moment, they're talking about transparency, not regulation. So in the water space, for example, there are a lot of metrics around this kind of stuff, and they have to be transparent to the public, but then they are regulated. And if they go outside certain things, then the regulator will intervene. Whereas in this space at the moment, it's about transparency. So I think the intent is that the public would then put pressure on us. But as long as we are investing what we believe to be consistent with what the community wants us to invest in, then, that's safe ground. Yeah.
I think they try, this isn't me, but what I've seen and read and heard, they're trying to steer councils away from what they describe as vanity projects. Yeah. And I don't think we're being at risk of operating that way.
Yep. Right, so now we get into the strategic priorities. So these are the areas where that require specific focus to make meaningful progress. They're changeable over time. So this is the area where you can provide your views into what you think are important, so that when we're looking at all of those things that we've previously talked about, which are the things that you want to elevate to the top of the list for consideration, if you like. So what we did last time, how do we put all of this together? So obviously we have all those things we just talked about. We have our levels of service, we have the significant issues that we need to address through the infrastructure strategy, and we have the community sentiment. So what does the community want us to do? And this is a very simplified version of how this works. It's obviously a lot more complicated than this. And then, so we have a very long list of the things that we could do. So then we have to work through that and say, well, what do we have to do? And where do we have discretion on, you know, where do we have discretion and what are our priorities in terms of applying that discretion. Then we have to layer on what can we afford and how do we allocate the available funding across the things that we think are important. And then what are our options for how we apply that. So essentially, at a very simplified level, that's what we need to do through this process. And so what we did last time for the LTP was we had this category of must do, which in the LTP was called Get the Basics Right First. For those of you who were here through the process, we called it baseline through the discussion. And these were the must do's. So the things that we saw as being required to do. And then we layered on top of that the strategic priorities. So what in between, there was some work done in terms of the borrowing limit and the kind of maximum rates increases that were seen as tolerable in inverted commas. And so we essentially filled up that headroom with the must-do program first, and then identified how much headroom was left to apply strategic priorities. And when we did that, years 1 to 2, I think it was, were totally taken up by must-dos, then the majority of year 3. And so it wasn't, yeah.
Yeah, it was fun as a politician.
So it was, yeah. So it was it was an interesting process because we went through this discussion about what are those strategic priorities, and then actually in that first 3 years, very little flexibility to actually deliver on those.
Illusion of choice.
So in terms of what we can do this time. So the first option is that we take a similar approach that we took last time. So we define the must-dos and what our strategic priority categories are. We classify projects against them, and then we score projects based on their contribution to each category. We set some funding envelopes and proportions for each priority category. So, which is what we did last time. We had a session, it was only one session, where we had the, you know, if you had $10, where would you invest it? And then you take off the must-dos, what have you got left? Fill it up with your strategic priorities based on the proportion that you want to spread across those strategic priorities. Obviously, in all of these options, there's a risk element, so that's in all of them. So I feel like the slide's in the wrong place. Should have come before this. I think I'll come back to this. Let's just keep talking through the options, and then I'll come back to the community sentiment from our early engagement. So the second option was that we allocate funding based on the needs and objectives of specific groupings of activities. So essentially what this means is you still have to identify what's must do and what's discretionary. You still classify projects against them, you still score projects, but your funding envelope and proportions are set by activity as opposed to by strategic priority. You take the same approach in terms of you have to take the must-dos off first and then allocating the discretionary items, and then look at the risk. And the third option we've discussed internally is that we structure our investment choices around the primary driver of the cost. And so that gives us the ability to discuss our appetite for investment in growth, service levels, and asset renewals. So there's a little bit more to this one than the others. Oh, fancy. So the cost drivers are, so this is a language that you'll be familiar with if you've been through the LTP process before. So one of the LGA requirements is that we determine the contribution of our capital expenditure to growth, levels and service of renewals, which are seen as the only three things that we would, they're the only three cost drivers that would drive why we invest in something. So usually this is an approach that we look at the end, and the growth component of this feeds into the development contributions policy. What we are doing this time is we are capturing this information at the beginning for each capital project. Or we're going to try to anyway. No, we are going to. And so what I'll just go through each of these individually. So when we're talking about growth, we're essentially saying, so this is taking a scenario based. So we'd be taking a scenario based approach here. So we would be looking at different forms of growth based investment and how different choices would shape the long-term development and growth patterns. And so, as I mentioned earlier, so Anita, you can just or Brent, you can throw in if I'm going off piece with this. We have, I think it's 6 priority development areas, and one of the challenges with planning, infrastructure and structure planning and all the rest of that is that they all have equal priority. And so we make decisions through our investment program in terms of sequencing them. What this does is this would take a deliberate approach and a transparent approach to what those scenarios are in terms of how we invest. Do we go everywhere at once? Do we put this one ahead of that one? Do we prioritise brownfield or infill going up over going out? Or do we prioritise going out over going up? So what are the different scenarios that we could respond to growth in terms of our investment? So this also becomes really important for the next iteration of the spatial plan and for the infrastructure strategy and for the water services strategy. So this is one of the key things to think about when we get to the statement of expectations is whatever approach that we take from a growth perspective, we need to ensure that the water services entity is taking the same approach, that those are integrated in terms of the planning. This would also consider different options for funding growth approaches.
So this bit feels very focused on the CapEx. So you've got options 1, 2 and 3 for establishing investment, but obviously we're investing in capital projects, but we've also got this operational side, which doesn't follow growth. It has level of service, but not in the same way. So in terms of choosing between one of the 3 options, is it more of a hybrid for the different, how would you?
Can we come back to that?
Yes, of course we can.
And I think option 3 was growth, levels of service and renewal, so we should catch that. How does this approach enable us to respond to fast track, where it just happens completely? You know, we may work through our spatial planning, our priority growth areas, and a fast track happens. Do we just say, well, good luck, Godspeed? I don't know, because there'll be huge pressure to service what is approved.
Essentially, some of those fast tracks could blow out all of our planning.
Yeah.
And so we have to plan for a scenario. Yeah. And fast tracks could disrupt those scenarios for sure. And so from an from an infrastructure planning perspective, those processes need to be flexible to change as things like fast track happen, if they happen. So,
I mean, it's sort of, we're talking ourselves around in circles a little bit though, because we're saying they've got to plan. We've got to tell them how to plan, but the planning's, we've already done the spatial plan, we've already identified that we want to constrain, intensify and go up rather than out. We've already done that, and then the piece about this fast track, but I do think we need to, we've also got more zone capacity through the housing capacity assessment than we can ever service. Yep. So, in terms of identifying how we prioritise those things, because do you do it based on what's the most efficient, cost-effective land use, or do you do it based on what's going to result in the best urban form, or what or who's going to deliver it first? I mean,
So those are the scenarios that would come to you here, because otherwise what happens is that we're picking something and presenting it, and the teams will have done that thinking in terms of how they think it's going to play out and what, you know, they might have based it on what is the best bang for buck. They might have said what gives us the greatest capacity for housing development for the lowest cost. What this approach does is presents the different ways that it could be delivered to ensure that that you have transparency of that and that you're agreeing to that.
But well, the problem is we're not agreeing to it. We've been told all the way along how we're going to do it, and we're not agreeing to how we would. If we were starting again, we would plan our growth differently. But the point is, we're responding to growth. We're not planning for it, and that's even doubled down by the time we get to the fast tracks and stuff, because we're just on the back foot every time. Anita.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, in terms of the fast track consents, the spatial plan and our long-term plan will say what our priorities are. So if there's a fast track consent outside of that, essentially we're saying to the developers, you've got to deliver that infrastructure by yourself. So where it does get a bit complicated is all the networks and the transport stuff. But I think what we use is a spatial plan and our infrastructure strategies to say, look, these are our priorities and these are where we're investing. This is where our development policy is based on. So, and when we provide that to, when it moves to a water entity, we have that set up in our statement of intent or expectations or whatever it's called, to say, yeah, these are your priorities and this is what we want to work with you to deliver for our community.
And that's all we can do. Like we have to find a way to make a plan that makes sense for our community, which is what we set out in the spatial plan. And the fast track process by design will try and disrupt that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't set out to plan to deliver what will work for our community.
It's going to create, I mean, you know, once again, the sort of zoning and housing capacity assessment stuff creates some super awkward situations for LTP, because we don't know which, we're required to deliver them all at, you know, various paces. We don't know which ones are going to come out at first, which one the developers are going to demand, which one the community is going to respond to, and which ones are going to be land banked. So we've got this program, we don't really know whether the LTP or the water services.
So we want to use this process and the infrastructure strategy to put more direction in that, because this is why water is important, because water is the enabler for the houses to get built. And so if there is direction in terms of the scenarios for developing that infrastructure, that will indicate where it goes, if you're talking about greenfield areas. So, I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to go into what these scenarios are, but that is, all of those things you're talking about need to be considered as part of that process.
We take the Southern Corridor and we're still completely dependent on 3 or 4 third parties, and not even talking about NZTA, but the developers to determine, who's going to front up with some of the upfront infrastructure costs, where it's even going to go to, dare I say it. There's anyway, just pointing out there's a lot of uncertainties there.
Yep.
COVID.
I think, part of the piece that's missing for me is always like, show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. We can come up with a great plan, but if the incentives aren't to develop in those areas, then, people will go in other ways. And I feel like that's the strategic piece that always feels missing, is that we're a business that anybody who buys from us is like, it's hurting us. It's like, stop buying from us. It feels insane. And I think I want to get to a point where growth is celebrated because it's investing into the social infrastructure of our district. It's improving things. It's adding to the asset value of everything. And I feel like out of anything, that is the North Star, is that how do we make it easy, cheap, and the most affordable? Water always flows to the lowest point. It's the same with development. It'll always go to where it's going to be cheaper. And if there's, a fast track that undermines it, I think doing that piece of work around strategically how we create those incentives for those things to happen, to support what we want to happen.
Yeah. So how do we get the land developed in the areas that we've zoned, that we provide the infrastructure to the density that we want, and in timeless? And I guess that comes down to,
there's a market involved.
Well, there is a market, but there's also rating policies, we could be very creative on,
That's
and
right.
that comes to a discussion that we'll have.
How do
So
we make it,
how do you incentivise the outcomes that we want to achieve?
how do we make it cheap and easy to do the right thing, expensive and long and hard to do the wrong thing?
Yeah, there we go.
My question is just around that housing and business capacity assessment, because that was supposed to come back to the new council for discussion, because it's not we must follow it. It's this is what our inputs delivered, therefore if we want to change the inputs, we might get something different. We were going to have that discussion. I think that's going to be key to figuring out where.
That will come back to council, yes.
As a part of this, because I think it's a fundamental input.
I think we'll assume that we'll come back to it, so it'll be part of your thinking when you're going through this process.
When we're going through the process.
Yeah,
So
and with
it's
regard
not-
to fast track, I'd just like to say that we don't know what's happening in fast track in 6 months,
Yeah.
12 months or 18 months, so it's really not possible to plan the potential development of
With,
fast track.
with fast track, I know we've got a development agreement policy brewing in the background. I don't know what the scope of that is and what it's intended for, but is there some way of, you know, if we're putting money in and signalling investment, is there some way, if we're working with developers, of locking things in via a development agreement so that when an application for fast track comes through, we are bound? And when they say, because to me, we can't be shifting too much, or create too much uncertainty for developers. If we have an uncertain market, people won't want to invest. So could we create some certainty with the use of DAs, or are we?
Just wondering if there's any to want to comment on.
Yes, so we do create certainty with DAs if that's what applicants want to come into the discussion with us for. But just bear in mind that, as John said, we have more than enough zone land. We have a lot of service land. We have priority areas set up for development to occur. So there are a lot of incentives for developers to develop as fast as they possibly can here, which is why we're developing faster than anywhere else in the country.
I think the pain will come if we have a government that is proud of and approving fast track consenting, that then starts putting pressure or even talking about regulatory requirements for us to service what comes through from the fast track. Because at the moment we don't have to. Yeah, as long as we've got our plans, as long as we've got our infrastructure strategy, we can probably say, well, you've got your consent, but we don't need to service it. That's my reading.
Not for roads.
But, well, yeah.
And the water CCO will.
Yeah, so I mean, that's going to be the tension. We sort of, how do we manage that pressure?
I just wanted to reflect as well, like, going back to the starting point of where this conversation took us around. Yes, we've got all these different layers and all these different competing tensions and emergent spaces and fast tracks coming into the mix here. And we're trying to find ways to sort of synthesise that and take that into our process and step forward with it. But, you know, going back 10, 15 years, we've always been in a position of challenges from growth. When we were a much smaller council, you know, the accusation that we were developer-led. So we are trying to put the mechanisms in place to make sure that this actually can be triaged and, you know, processed in an as efficient way as possible. But I think it's just got to be a live conversation because we don't really know where these pieces of legislation are landing. As Dave's alluded to, we don't know when these fast tracks are going to emerge. And I think part of our collective muscle as an organisation is to have some resilience, have some flexibility, have the ability to pivot when we need to, and to try and have as long a vision and a runway on that as we possibly can. But we won't be able to lock it down entirely, and we have to live with some uncertainty in that space.
The SHAs were obviously another example of that. We had to adapt to changing circumstances, but equally, I mean, I don't think we've ever been anywhere near the level of infrastructure deficit that we're currently at. I mean, we're literally 3 or 4 times the infrastructure deficit than we were 10 years ago. And yeah, both relatively and absolutely.
So what, through this process then, we can, yeah, what, as Cody was saying, what can we do to incentivise what we want to happen, what the community wants to happen where? But on the other hand, there are likely to be increasing levers available to us to make development in areas that it's not socially acceptable or economically or environmentally problematic, that we can disincentivise it by having policies, by planning to have policies in place, not planning on what's going to happen where, because clearly we have little influence on that. But if some, as Nikki was suggesting, have a range of policies. So if there is a proposal for there, they will know that that will be expensive for them to do so.
Yeah,
And-
but the problem is that flies against the face of the RMA reform, which is basically
No.
going down to.
Yeah, but so does the RMA, so the planning legislation is contradictory in that sense. It says it's going to give local authorities powers to do that. So surely through this, we should look for opportunities to make the most of that.
This will be the bit that test as to whether the spatial planning component of the reform has any teeth at all, or whether they're going to keep this rhetoric that, you know, this is about landowners being able to do whatever they like with their land, and the two, as you say, the two are completely conflicting objectives.
So I think it's a fundamental issue that's going to affect our investment priorities, our growth projections and everything else. So probably something that we need to try early on, you know, and if it's sort of getting ahead of growth, growing well, whatever we call that, you know, then that's a fundamental driver in this, understanding what we can influence and how we can best do that is probably going to be really key.
Yeah. I think what Cody is getting at as well is talking about the levers we can pull, which would be rates. So we had this conversation last LTP.
Yeah.
This is your land rates. And so I think this is where this process kind of does, you know, these are all things that we need to talk about through this process. So when you're talking about the revenue levers, the different ratings models become part of this, because that's where you have the most influence in terms of incentivising or de-incentivising, I would have thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a very different view on Cody's view on using rates to incentivise people to develop, because the process is not very easy at all to do a development. So there's a whole lot of different conversations, the pros and cons of using rates to try and incentivise people to develop.
Yeah.
I appreciate the sentiment of Karen, but yeah, part of the reason I was interested in CCO is because I think there's always that adage of you can have things good, fast, or cheap. And I feel like we've had a lot of things good and relatively cheap or cost effective, but it's been the pace. When we talk about infrastructure, it's the pace of infrastructure, keeping pace with what the growth demands are. And with a lot of developers I talk to who are wanting to put in fast track, it's because of the pace of things moving. And I think like the whole incentive things includes how easy is it to do the right thing. I hear all the time people, I'm trying to do what the initiative is and I'm having a hard time. And I think in the same respect, we need to be really frank about what role we have to play. And I think the RMA reform sort of alludes to that as well, in terms of the barriers that people are facing in order to do the right thing. So I think it's holistic within that. And I think the revenue part is a part of the incentives as much as it is the overall integrated issue. Yeah.
And I mean, this is what traffic fast track is, that people think that fast track will be faster, therefore better, and it's you know, going to that point that people.
It's definitely not cheaper.
Well, it's definitely not cheaper and often not better. So, I mean, you know, we're not even getting 2 out of the 3 in that case. Yeah. I don't know which one we're not even getting the fast one in those cases. So I'm not sure which one they're delivering.
So I hear having an approach that clearly shows how we are responding to growth, and having that as an input into our decision making is what you want.
Yeah.
Right. So can we, I'm conscious I've only got 20 minutes left. Yeah. So the other component of this is, well, the second component is levels of service. And so this is one where we've obviously just talked about this earlier in terms of flowing through into the activity plans. And I think this is your biggest prioritisation lever if you're talking about OPEX. And this is one where we had some discussions. I think, Nikki, you raised from the last LGP discussion, we had all of these discussions about the fact that our must-dos were meeting levels of service, maintaining levels of service, and yet, when we then did the cost driver calculation at the end, 30% or 20% or whatever the percentage was stated in the LTP, improving levels of service. And so what I just wanted to, one of the key things when you're looking at levels of service is that improving levels of service isn't, it's not just looking at what we define as levels of service in our LTP, and that's part of what we'll talk about with the activity plans in terms of whether those levels of service are, you know, focused in the right areas. But this breakdown that you'll see on this slide is actually from the it's an adjusted version of what's in the water economic regulation. And we have been talking about including this as part of what we do for the LTP, because it actually is a really clear explanation of what levels of service mean. So one component of levels of service is enhancing your levels of service in terms of the agreed level at which you provide the service to your community. You've agreed with them, we're going to do it at this standard, and now we've agreed we're going to step it up to the standard. So that's enhancements to level of service. You've got the meeting current levels of service, you know, against the same standard. But regulatory requirements, so compliance requirements, are also seen as improving levels of service, because you are going from non-compliant to compliant. It's not level of service in the way that you picture it when you're talking about service provision. Yeah. But also, if you're talking about resilience, risk management and environmental improvements, they are also levels of service. And so those are key considerations for our infrastructure strategy and for our investment decisions around the LTP. So we want to make sure that we're capturing all those different lenses on levels of service, so that when you're thinking about it, it's not just, you know, we said we would we would have RFSs dealt with on the speed.
Or an extra day a week at Harwea Library.
Yes.
Where does that?
So it's a mixture of that and other things.
Though, because, you know, if you take libraries, for instance, is we have one library per 5,000 people, or just, and you're pulling numbers out of my, but, you know, if you've got 10,000 people, you've got 2 libraries. When you get to 15,000 people, you build another library. That's not an increased level of service, that's maintaining level of service.
Yes.
So, you know, we've got to be super careful that we don't say, oh, you're getting something new, you're offering a new level of service. We're just maintaining, and I mean, we've come into real problems with this in the past, and, you know, and this is where the growth bit comes in again, is the new stuff is mostly the growth. If you retained your current population, you wouldn't require it. And you've got to, you know, you've got to be really careful about that. Yes. And we've run into problems with that with the Upper Clutha conveyancing scheme and things like that, is that there's more allocated to level of service in there than there should be, because most of it should be allocated to growth.
Yep, and I think Nikki and Quentin gave that feedback through this process last time, which is one of the reasons why we want to take this focus, is to make sure that we get that balance between level of service and growth right. So if it is growth related, that it can be recovered through DCs.
Yeah. And I don't think we've had that balance right.
Yeah. And so we want to draw more attention to it from the beginning of the discussion, rather than it being a calculation we do at the end. It's a deliberate part of the decision making from the beginning.
Presumably we can think about capital projects knowing that they are going to be servicing growth. They're going to be needed because of the growth that we're planning for.
Yeah.
And therefore we can think about how that's funded. Yeah. And that will influence our rates.
As Penny said before, right from the get-go, we're collecting all of the information about capital projects with that growth level of service renewal lens on it.
Yeah, and I think to your question, Nikki, that this is the area that is your lever for OPEX prioritisation. Obviously, the others aren't as applicable, but we're in there's an evolving process for prioritisation. Obviously, last time we didn't look at CapEx, OPEX at all. This time you're looking at the activity plan, so there's a bit more of a focus on that, but this is still predominantly CapEx prioritisation. Sorry, I'm just aware that we've got 15 minutes left. The last part of this is looking at renewals. I think we already covered this earlier, which is actually just giving you more information about what drives the renewals. And so this is an area where there might be scenarios in terms of the risk you're taking if you have, you know, certain levels of investment, low risk, medium risk, high risk, and what those risks might be. So this approach is obviously more scenario based, it's less linear than the others. We felt like this was one that reflected the things that we think about actually when officers are building the plan. And from the discussion around the table, it sounds like these are the things that you're interested in as well. But it is less linear, and this would result in a range of scenarios that you get presented with rather than a a list. So there is a question about whether you have any other suggestions in terms of the way, what you'd like to see in the prioritisation. So sorry, there is the ability to have a bit of a hybrid where you might layer over the level of service, renewals and growth, specific areas of priority for you, and that might come through in the level of service space.
I'm just trying to understand how we bring together the OPEX and the CAPEX, because obviously CAPEX has OPEX implications, and it's a slightly different thing. So are you planning on doing the CAPEX side of things first, understanding the OPEX implications of that CAPEX scenario that would be favoured, then going what's left over for some of these other things, and that would be, I imagine, in the full OPEX areas like climate and biodiversity, economic diversification, economic development.
So the advantage of the IBIS, the tool that finance now has, is that we can look at the modelling of the stuff earlier, and that we're going to be collecting the consequential OPEX as we collect the CAPEX information.
Right.
So they'll work alongside each other, but only as fast as the actual OPEX work is progressing. So Catherine, sorry, you might.
So we could go, okay, under this scenario, you would have this much discretionary OPEX available for other things, and you could walk us through.
In theory, yes, but this is all very complex.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand.
Layering over what seems like a long amount of time, but actually you'll see quite short.
It's making sure that we don't make decisions on capital scenarios without understanding the implications for
well. No, that's 100% part of this.
Yeah.
So as we bring that information to you, particularly in that July period, the CAPEX will have the consequential OPEX linked to it. So you'll be able to look at the CAPEX and we'll be able to explain what the OPEX implications of that is.
And you're seeing the activity plans with the OPEX at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. They're all coming in July.
You guys will figure it out.
And you've got to remember the pie, there's very little discretionary. It is mainly coming from capital. So whether it's interest, whether it's depreciation. So that is where your biggest bang for buck is.
Yeah. So we're going to need to integrate those other things into some of the capital projects.
In order to get meaningful feedback in this process, is it worth us developing sort of more statements that help lead it, like Vision 2050? I'm just thinking of this sort of themes of the conversation, thinking like turning growth into the solution, keeping pace with the total needs of infrastructure, including like the libraries and the ancillary things. Like if we have those values and vision and, user-centric comms and user experience, so that's like the trust and transparency and the integration with democracy. But but is that going to be a better lens for you guys as guidance to have reference to?
In terms of your priorities?
Shaping the long-term plan. Yeah, because I think of often when it comes to priorities, it feels very much like this project, that project, like capital intensive, do that road and not this park, whatever. But I feel like having more of those overarching vision statements really helps integrate the strategy behind those investments more so than the actual investments themselves.
If you were going for something like option 3, then I think so.
Yeah.
Help with development of scenarios, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels to me like they're useful guiding statements in virtually all contexts.
Yeah.
However, the sort of level of detail that will need to be gone into in terms of breaking down into the scenarios and the investment areas probably needs more layers behind that. But I do think they're probably a good starting point if you have those as a group.
I guess what Cody's alluding to is we've got the 2050 vision.
Yeah.
What's the next layer down that shapes the next 10 years? My very Blythe delivering more for less. Yeah. Well, we can cut and slice that whichever way you want, setting up our communities for success, sort of future-proofing our neighbourhoods. I think, and there might be sound bites, but I think if we're talking about the why we're doing what we're doing, and alongside the what and the how, I think those.
Yeah, we do pick that up as we go along, and we are, we're noting down some of those great statements, and then weaving that back in but ultimately, every time we've done an LTP, we've had a sort of an overarching theme to it. and it's sounding like there's something coming together now.
I don't want that thing to be austerity.
Like, how can we do more for less?
We don't have to land that today.
No,
You can ponder that one, and that's really helpful.
You might find that they become a useful shorthand for your own conversations as well.
Yeah.
It just anchors you back in a moment or makes a point quickly.
So on that point about, in particular, what the Vision 2050 says, I think that's where the scenarios will be really useful, because and I've been looking at that document a bit lately. It's a lovely document. We're actually moving away from some of the objectives in there. We're not going towards them. We're not achieving this sort of high sounding and valid and valuable statements in there. So those scenarios could be useful in saying, well, okay, given that we want to be here in 2050, given the current trajectory, we're going to be way over here on that and way over here on that, and 2050 is still out there. So I think it's going to be useful exercise in that perspective too, and that will help inform our decisions.
So we've got a spot at the next steering group to come back on this, so maybe that's our guidance and action from this discussion.
So just thinking, because if we want to get agreement at the next session, so that we can then start building it into the work that the teams are doing in terms of building up programs, the programs, the infrastructure strategy, the activity plans. So I'm thinking out loud, what do we need to do so that we can get to an agreement at the next?
I wonder if if everyone's agreeable, if we come up with a sort of a synopsis, a summary synopsis, and then circulate that via email for you to further consider and input to.
We've got 10 minutes now. We can do a bit of
with option 3 if you need to land on an option today.
In terms of those principles, though, if you want to use those in the process. So if people are broadly happy with option 3, we can come back next time with a more detail about how that will be applied. But if you want to have some principles or priorities in line with what you were just talking about, we've got 10 minutes left. We could have a brainstorm now that we could then bring back at the next session to discuss alongside how it would be applied in the process.
Sounds good.
Yeah?
Yeah?
Let's
Wait a minute.
Growth pays for growth.
Growth pays for growth.
Yeah, but I have a problem with growth pays for growth because I don't know enough detail about it.
Yeah.
I actually don't like that, personally don't like that statement.
Why is that out of interest?
Because I think it has a potential to also disincentivise some stuff without a lot more detail on it.
I think the counterfactual is important though, is that if growth doesn't pay for growth, we pay for growth. And I think that's the bit that we're trying to get away from, is that there's a real strong perception that we've been and I think it's more than a perception, subsidising growth for far too long, and we need to rebalance the table. So I don't know, but if growth doesn't pay for growth, I don't know who does. And I think that's the bit that I'm struck.
The flip side is, if that mentality drives a whole lot of decisions to make it more costly for development to occur, and development stops, we constrain supply, prices go up. So I just think there just needs to be a lot more detail into that.
It's actually a market-driven approach. It's actually a market-driven approach. If development costs what it costs, and that it bears its own costs, then that will determine whether I think and will sell. I mean, it's actually ironically going back to market-driven forces rather than socialising the cost.
But I think growth paying for growth is just one element of good growth.
Yeah.
Okay, because I think if we just say growth should pay for its growth, we carve up the whole landscape of growth that is cost neutral to the existing ratepayers. We may not be any better off in our urban form, in our, sort of how it feels our community. So these are sort of a more encompassing phrase of smart growth. Or whatever, sort of,
yeah. But I think we've got a government direction that says we will grow, and we will grow. So it's a case of making sure that it can be sustainable. Now, that's why I don't like the word pays.
So it's the opportunities
Because
of growth, it's actually
How do you
growth
actually
that,
make it work?
what would growth need to look like for us to welcome it? So what are the opportunities that it brings, whether that's,
Doesn't drive other people.
at the university or, enough density to get a really good public transport system, all of those.
Equally, it's a value proposition. If people can see, if people buy into the Southern Corridor and know that they've got good public transport and they're not going to get stuck in traffic on the way to work, and there's a playground down the street and a new library and a swimming pool there, they're not going to complain about the cost. And, and the value of their house will be reflected in the quality of the life that they lead.
I think it is just worth highlighting that the whole government system is designed around growth pays for growth.
Yeah.
All the new reforms, are doubling down on growth pays for growth, so that you are not reliant on ratepayers and, you're not reliant on councils and you're not putting costs on ratepayers. So all of the recent changes that they are making are putting in place mechanisms to better ensure that growth pays for growth.
Nominally.
Yeah.
Except they also said they wanted to make development cheaper. And they completely counter arguments.
How does that apply to visitor growth?
Sorry?
How does that apply to visitors?
The same principle applies, is that we need visitors.
You would understand that, but would,
We need to get our differentials right around.
So can we just
It's a user
put a
pays.
slight pin in the concept? I think we've got the concept.
Yeah.
Is there anything else from a principal's perspective that you want us to try and draw together something to bring back next time?
One of the things I found when we put smart meters in hardware was Veolia came out like a week later and said, oh, there's a constant drain on there, and just turned the tap off. And I was like, oh my God, that is so great that you can go around the network. And I don't know if that's like tech solutions or smarter, not harder, but there was an element of going, now that we've got the data set, the same with modelling and what Catherine's done, just smarter modelling, more tech-based solutions that drive decision-making, because that demand management piece is so crucial.
And beyond that, it's also the, and I was thinking that when I was reading through this PowerPoint deck earlier, that particularly for the outcomes, we need to gather other intelligence on what's actually happening. What's the impact of our policies? And what the impact's likely to be in future. Some you can do it through smart metering, some you need to use other means of gathering real-time and future casting data as well, which in some areas we're doing really well, others there's nothing.
Yeah.
And then because some of the measures in there are pretty nonsensical, like 20-day response time for a freedom camping complaint, but that's just a small one. There's others we should have. If we're going to be investing in something, or put it the other way, we should not be investing in anything we can't measure the effect of.
I kind of like what you're saying then, because I think it speaks to what John said earlier, which is getting growth right.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of, we'll play with something along those lines.
I think it's one other thing I'm conscious of. We are going to be limited to what we can do ourselves and what we can fund. So is a theme of what can we enable? How do we collaborate? How do we allow other people to do things? And I think that's
And I mean, the same applies with the tourism discussion, doesn't it? Because it's people who automatically go to we don't want more tourism, but no, what we don't want is tourism that adversely affects our community. We want people to have a good experience, feel welcome, and be paying their way. We've just got to make sure that that's how the DMP is framed, is that it's about making sure that we benefit from the tourism that comes to.
If we can get a really good way of monetising bike trails, anyone? Well, that would be.
Rod Drury has a plan for that.
That would be
one of the other things
There's one of many user pays aspects that we need to look at.
I think one of the other things you might take away from what we've been talking about is the well-beings is something that's important to us as a community, and that it should be, for me, it should be it's our top line focus.
Yeah, there needs to be
We
equity.
articulated it a bit differently,
There needs to be equity in that, because some people get more value out of the stuff that we deliver under wellbeing. We don't deliver for everybody. We don't deliver to meet everybody's wellbeing. Having some people subsidising other people's wellbeing and having to fund their own. So then we need to be just careful about that. Wellbeing is affected by paying too much rates as well. So just just a little bit of care with that, and I think we need to look at the community engagement for some of the sentiment as well. It's on the last.
Yes, Nicola, you want?
Growth is in there, yeah, but basic infrastructure, we have to do the core stuff well.
Nicola?
Yeah.
I don't know who just said that, you maybe, about wellbeing is just the wording of it. Because essentially, wellbeing is sustainability, it's about social, environmental, it's just balancing it, and that's in my mind, I'm like, that's really what we're doing. We're not talking about well-being as like making everyone happy. It's because to your point there, I feel like we're not making swimmers happy and not bike riders. It's like, no, we're just trying to find like a equitable balance there, and
so let's think.
Maybe the wording well-being isn't right.
That's like that.
Yeah.
I wonder if growing well's got some punctuation missing. It should be growing, comma, well, question mark. Growing.
Well, we are growing. Punctuation's important, you've got to know your shit or know your shit.
So at the beginning of this conversation, there was a value for money type lens. Bang for buck.
Well, it's how
Like
do you
a-
make the best of limited funds? Like, where's it going to have the most impact for the most people in the gaps that we see?
Yeah.
But like I said before, I like the idea of looking after our residents and ratepayers. I mean,
Yes.
the message that's who we're here for. We've often got into a bit of a trap saying we've got to provide for the tourists, and I mean that's part of what we do. But firstly, we're serving the residents.
Even that we have to do, in such a way that it protects that aspect of the point I've made a couple of times now, the economy. If we just keep growing at the rate we are, and tourism grows at the rate we are, it will not continue in that form.
Do it for the residents though, and the ratepayers. Do it for the residents, and the tourists will come. That was a famous quote that we used in one of our documents. What's it?
Get it right for the residents.
Yeah.
And to step those through to the district.
Yeah.
Just reminding you of the comment that Katie made earlier about having a sort of culture and attitude of springtime, and an attitude towards opportunity and change.
Opportunity and change.
Cody.
Yeah.
It's the only inevitability, isn't it? Change.
Spring.
It's going to still be a lot of springtime.
It will be autumn when the consultation.
Well done.
Really? Yeah. But we didn't talk about this, so I think you guys got...
Which is important.
Yeah, so I think this doesn't look too different actually to what we focused on last time or what we're talking about this time. So keep prioritising the basics. So water obviously is still important to the community, and transport. Advocate for funding tools so that it's not rates. A lot of that feedback was actually about the visitor levy, and obviously we continue to advocate and lobby for the visitor levy, but without securing it, it's not a thing that we can actually have inform the LTP. There was a theme around focusing on ensuring that the economy is protected against, diversified so that it's not reliant on tourism. Focus on improving council operational efficiency and on communities and the environment. So ensuring that we keep a focus on community services and the environment as we go into this period. I mean, last time the community services was one of the key feedbacks, the key themes as well, but I suspect it's come up, the way that it's framed in a lot of the feedback as protect. I think it's probably picking up on some of the narrative from government in terms of what the community might see as at risk because of the government reforms.
I think economic development's a tricky one in that economic development has traditionally been something that we just deliver. Whereas obviously we don't understand what the goal is and what the framework is. So I'm trying to just, in that same context, is how does the development of the economy fund the development of the economy rather than us funding it and us delivering it? So how does that become more self-sustaining?
How does the economy work for us?
And I suppose that's part of the visit levy, part of the GST share, whatever it is, but there has to be a feedback loop. It can't just be a one-way street.
That's a really good point, because I've just been doing some simple arithmetic, and what I calculate is we produce about $2 billion of excess GDP, because our GDP per capita at 89,000 is about 78% more than the rest of the country per capita. And so why we're going to central government with a begging bowl instead of demanding is beyond me. What?
We have certainly done that
Yeah.
over the years.
Do they listen?
It's been speak to the hand.
I know, and Mike Phelan a few weeks ago said we should also almost create a special economic zone, and he said, don't go to central government and say that you're special. They're tired of hearing that we're special, but we are special.
It's very unique.
But what I would do is make sure that if we got a government that gave us a 5% bed tax and we got 75 million a year, plus or minus, where's our list? What's our plan? What do we spend it on? And if we can't verbalise that, we can't daylight that, and we can't say, yes, this would go on that would go on that, because that's the stuff, I know it's for the future, we need to all be able to talk about.
So we did do a massive piece of work around this when we got to the point where government was prepared to enable legislation for specific to QLDC. And we brought in independent economic experts to undertake a full, rationale for visitor levy. It's a wonderful, 280-page read. It's the Martin Jenkins report. I'm sorry, I've got so much history involved in what we have been trying to do in this space. And I do think it's getting close, although I do see that Auckland is starting to think it's got a special case to make as well. That could be a good thing for us.
They also have a regional deal. So
they also have a regional
unrelated
deal. So I think, we are going to continue to strive, and you get it, it's a no-brainer really.
But just, following on from that, that was quite a while ago, so just to refresh, what we would spend the money on, and obviously with the water stuff going out, we're a little bit limited.
Identify the water.
Yes, but I think in as easy a way as possible.
So a refresh of that was done as part of the regional deal, in terms of, but based on the same assumptions, because they were all discussed with Treasury at the time and were framed around what Treasury saw as acceptable in terms of what the money would be spent on. And so the way that it is, the way that business case was done originally and the way the refresh is focused is actually with that principle of looking after our residents and ratepayers, in that because we have such a high number of visitors in terms of more than doubling on a peak day and all of that, what we need support from in terms of visitors paying for visitors is actually the imposition they put on the core infrastructure that our ratepayers use. And so we, unlike areas like Auckland, so Auckland wants it for major events. They want a major event fund. Other areas want it for tourism-specific infrastructure. That's not what our case was based on. Our case was based on using it to pay for core infrastructure that visitors double the use of, and we have to build to meet that capacity. And so when we did that refresh, we also took out water, and so it identifies essentially the operational expenses for services and the CapEx projects that relate to core infrastructure that we have evidence that says visitors use that infrastructure, and it puts pressure on infrastructure. Obviously, one of the main pieces of infrastructure that visitors put pressure on, if you take out water, is the transport network, and the main components of that transport network are not ours. And so that is one of the kind of complicating factors, is that when you start talking about visitors paying for the infrastructure that they use, actually the infrastructure they put the most pressure on is not the one now.
And they don't pay DCs for that.
Not what we pay for.
I think it will come down to, depending on how tightly complicated any proposed model would have to be back to certain specific types of infrastructure. We're working on the basis that it would be, because that's the messaging we always had in the past. But if they are looking at something that is maybe used in multiple locations, there may be a whole different range of parameters. So actually cutting out that time will be somewhat different.
So CODC would be more interested in the economic development side of it.
Yeah.
So that is something that through the regional deal, it's not breaking any confidence there, that was in our proposal, yes.
I mean, we've got to be careful, you know, that we're not just slicing the same pie a different way, and because the whole point of it is we want to be able to do more. We want to be able to deliver more infrastructure, better experience, better offering by getting more money, getting more revenue. We don't want to just be recovering the same revenue and slicing the pie differently. And that, so yeah, we've got to make sure that the visitor levy's on top of what we already get, that it takes load off. You know, it allows us to offer more, provide more benefit, better experience, and all that sort of stuff. It's not too constrained, because I think if we constrain it to a core infrastructure, I don't think we're going to meet the, we're going to get there. But the upside of that is releasing money somewhere, you know, releases money somewhere else. So
I'm sorry, I was down a rabbit hole. It's 12 minutes past one.
I just wanted to say, be ready. We need debt headroom available for if the shit hits the fan, and we've struggled with that in the past, but not too much. We don't want to take it to 4% because of that. We want to, you know, do it within. And I had a question about deliberations, but that might be for later. But I think we need to be involved in designing the deliberations. That comes upon us really quickly in terms of the timing available, the structure. So if we could talk about that at some point, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Just a final point, because it wasn't addressed, so it didn't come up. The question around RTO funding is something that we'll talk about when we come to the ratings conversations. Just working with Catherine around what a range of options are for you to consider there.
So April.
Yeah, we did cover
April,
okay.
Yeah. I thought that was used.
I thought it was a members.
Yeah, it's both, but it's a member decision.
It's a piece that we'll just need to address in terms of with the rates capping proposals coming up, something we need to transparently work
So
through.
that's not separate.
No.
It's a targeted rate. It's all lumped in as rates.
Yes.
Yes.
Good to know. Great job. Well done. Almost made it the whole way through.
So we're back here at 2 o'clock.
That was such a good presentation.